What's up guys, this is your favorite fanfic YouTuber, the Fanfic Majesty, and welcome to another amazing video. You can follow me on Patreon for exclusive stories. 2F. Chapter 26 Misunderstanding of JARVIS. Advertise here. Chapter 26. Misunderstanding of JARVIS. Tony looked around with a little trembling, because it was too dark. If someone hadn't supported him, he would have passed out. If you look at the darkness for too long, you will feel as if you were about to be swallowed up by it, and you may even lose your mind. After making up some things, as for Yingson, it was okay. He had been staying here before, and he no longer had anything to fear in his heart. After all, he was not even afraid of death. Carl looked at Tony's embarrassment with a chuckle and wished he could take a photo with his phone. Then the Shadow Ninja took them to fly to New York. It was just in the world of Shadow. The world of Shadow would reach anywhere very quickly. So about an hour later, Carl took Tony and Yingson to appear in Tony's mansion. Oh shit, I never want to enter that world of yours again. The more. After Tony came out of the shadow world, he said one word to Carl and then started to vomit, and took away the little food he had eaten from the terrorists. Vomited it all out. TCH, I'm not happy to let you in. If I had known, I would have taken a picture of your embarrassing scene and posted it online. Hello JARVIS. Carl curled his lips, then said without mercy, and even directly started a fight with the artificial intelligence JARVIS. Say hello. Hello, gentlemen. Boss, you are in a very bad state right now. I have contacted Ms. Pepper and she is on her way. JARVIS said hello to Carl and Yingson before saying to Tony, and Carl didn't care at all that this was Tony's house. When he walked to the bar, he picked up a bottle of good wine and poured it himself. He even poured a drink for Yingson. The two of them ignored Tony. You two damn bastards. You actually drank my wine and didn't come to help me. Tony looked up and saw Carl and Yingson drinking wine and looking like they had no intention of caring about him, so he gritted his teeth and said, Okay Tony, you should pretend to be miserable now. When Pepper comes, she will care more about you. Besides, aren't you okay? You can still stand up. Carl said to Tony with a nonchalant expression, even clinked glasses with Yingson. Carl, isn't it good for us to do this? Yingson said to Carl hesitantly. Don't worry, he's fine. It's almost the same as motion sickness. He'll be fine after a while. Carl said to Yingson with a smile, and then the two of them shrugged and continued drinking. Happy. Come on, JARVIS contacted me just now. Tony is at home now, but his condition is not very good. There are two people with him. Pepper Potts said anxiously to Happy in the driver's seat. Okay, I'm accelerating. Happy pressed the accelerator to the bottom, and the Rolls-Royce rushed towards Tony's villa at high speed, but they were followed by several black cars, filled with Stark Industries security guards and Tony's bodyguard. After all, JARVIS said that there were two more people coming back with Tony, and asked Pepper to bring someone with him. JARVIS naturally takes Tony's safety as its first priority, so when he is not sure whether Carl and Yingson are friends or foes, he will naturally tell Pepper to bring bodyguards, and even greet Carl and Yingson to avoid alerting the enemy. Hurry up. Click 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 click. After Pepper led a group of people to the door of Tony's villa, JARVIS opened the door for them directly, and then they quickly followed the direction told by JARVIS. When they were about to arrive at the living room, Carl and Yingson were working at the bar. A transparent protective shield suddenly lowered next to it, trapping Carl and Yingson inside. Yingson had a confused look on his face. Carl put down his wine glass, his expression already a little ugly, if this was Tony's behavior. Carl will not be lenient, even if you are the Iron Man of the future. Tony was confused by the sudden lowering of the protective shield at this moment. Boom. Boss, where are the terrorists? Happy rushed into the living room from the door first, followed by a group of men in black suits, and then Pepper, and Carl's eyes flashed blue when he saw this scene, and then the surrounding area began to freeze, and all the wine on the bar turned into ice cubes. At this moment, Tony also understood why. No. JARVIS, open the shield. They are my saviors. They are not terrorists. Hey, Carl. Don't be so excited. This is what JARVIS did. Hey. Tony saw the warmth around him. The temperature started to get colder and the protective shield began to freeze. He immediately stood up and explained loudly. And pushed Happy away, who was standing in front of him. After all, Carl and Yingson were the ones who saved him. If they hadn't been for it, they would have died, let alone if Carl was offended by them. Everyone present. They would all be killed instantly. Carl killed all the terrorists in 2 seconds. Yes, boss, I'm sorry, gentlemen. I put boss's safety first. After hearing Tony's words, JARVIS immediately put away the protective shield, apologized to Carl and Yingson, and explained. Explain the reason for doing this. Sorry, Carl, Yingson, I didn't know JARVIS would do this. Happy, take them out. Tony stepped forward and apologized to Carl and Yingson, and then asked Happy to go out with all the bodyguards. Go. Hey, Tony, what's going on? Pepper walked up and asked Tony. They are my friends and my rescuers. JARVIS made a mistake. It's okay. Come on, guys, let's have a drink. Tony smiled and explained to Pepper, then walked to the card. In front of them, he poured a glass on his own, and raised his glass to Carl and Yingson, but Carl did not brush his face, picked up the wine glass and clinked it with him. Because Carl dissipated the freezing power when JARVIS put away the protective shield, and the wine returned to its original state, only ice colder. Okay, Tony, I'll come back to you in a few days. You should have a lot of things to do now. Let's go. After Carl finished drinking, he said to Tony, and then walked directly to a corner with a shadow. Poe looked at Carl's behavior in confusion, and then Carl went directly into the darkness and disappeared. My God, Tony, did you see it? He just disappeared like that. Pepper said to Tony a little incoherently. I saw it, we all saw it. Okay Pepper, this is his ability, and he brought us back. Okay, get ready. 2 things. First, I want to eat a burger. Second, I want to call. It's a press conference. You arrange it. By the way, JARVIS, arrange a room for Yingson. Tony put his hands on Pepper's shoulders, looked at her and said, after finishing speaking, he asked JARVIS to arrange a meeting for Yingson. After entering the room, he walked into the bathroom. Okay, boss. Mr. Yingson, please follow my instructions. Your room is on the 3rd floor. Chapter 27 Press Conference. Advertise here. Chapter 27. Press Conference. After Carl returned to Queens from the Shadow World, he sat on the sofa and recalled the plot of the movie. After the news of Tony Stark's return to New York was spread, Carl suddenly thought of something and took out the extremely fast Bluetooth. Extreme speed. Sell all of Stark Industries stocks when they are at their highest value. It must be before he holds a press conference. Carl pressed Bluetooth and said to extreme speed. He remembered that Tony would probably hold a press conference later, and then it is to announce that Stark Industries will close its weapons manufacturing and R&D department. At that point, Stark Industries stock will plummet again. Yes, boss. A very fast electronic sound came from Bluetooth, and Carl breathed a sigh of relief. If he hadn't thought of it, he would have lost billions. Carl is planning to sell it now at a high price, and then wait until Tony announces the closure of the weapons manufacturing department and the stock plummets to the freezing point. He will buy the stock again, and wait until Tony announces his identity after the battle with Obadiah. The stock will see a big rise, and he can even control the shares of Stark Industries. This woolly Carl is ready to get it all. Carl didn't tell Aunt May and Wanda that Carl went to save Tony. He knew that every time Wanda and Pilot heard the name of Stark Industries, their eyes flashed with hatred, so as to prevent them from knowing that Carl went to save Tony. If you are unhappy, it is better not to say anything directly and wait for guidance later. It is always not good for 2 children to harbor hatred. It seems that Sokovia's weapons are not documents signed by Tony, but documents signed by Obadiah, which is what Obadiah sold to Sokovia's terrorists. Although it is not Tony's fault, he has something to do with it, so Carl doesn't plan to teach Wanda and Pilot to forget this, but plans to let them see their enemy die with their own eyes. The other side. Tony took a burger and headed to the press conference in a Rolls-Royce, while Yingson chose to rest at home, and Tony also knew Carl's identity. Tony only needed to use JARVIS to check it out. At the same time, Carl's mobile phone number was also recorded by JARVIS. Tony reluctantly regarded Carl as a friend. After all, he saved himself twice and saved Yingson. Although he also understood that Carl should have a purpose for doing this, he didn't care, and Carl was so strong, there was such a thing. Tony made his friends. Hey Tony, oh, God, I knew you were going to be okay. Obadiah opened Tony's car door and hugged him, saying with a tone of joy and surprise. Hey Stan, you don't know what I went through there. 3 whole months. I couldn't even eat a bite of hamburger. Tony said a little excitedly after hugging Obadiah. After all, now he thinks about those 3 I shuddered for months of my life. Okay, it's okay. You've gone home. By the way, do you have one of mine? Obadiah patted Tony's shoulder kindly and asked. No, that's it, it's gone, really. Tony said to Obadiah after taking a bite of the burger. Okay, let's go. Reporters from all the major newspapers are already here. Obadiah said helplessly to Tony, and then took him into the company. So, I have decided to shut down the weapons manufacturing department of Stark Industries. And never activate it. Tony stood on the podium and said a bunch of useless words, then fell silent and announced his decision. Hey, he was drunk. Yes, he was drunk. For the next news, please pay attention to the decision of the Stark Industries Board of Directors. Obadiah saw that Tony actually told the media that he wanted to close the weapon manufacturing department of Stark Industries, and immediately he stepped forward and pulled Tony away, explained to the media reporters, and pulled Tony away. Hey, Tony, how can you say that to them? We are an arms company. If you close the weapons manufacturing department now, what are we going to do? Are we going to sell baby pacifiers? Obadiah took Tony to the large reactor in the factory. The place said to him. No, Stan, I think we should change the direction of the company's development. For example, how about clean energy? Tony said to Obadiah nonchalantly, but he did not let go of the weapons manufacturing department. Hey Tony, we haven't been doing research on clean energy for a long time. You have to come up with something to silence those board members. For example, this. Obadiah looked at Tony helplessly and then suggested, and pointed to Tony's chest. Who told you, Pepper? Happy. It's still the group of bodyguards. It should be the group of bodyguards, okay, you see, but he only belongs to me. Tony said to Obadiah, a little confused, because I don't know how he knew there was a reactor on his chest, and he unbuttoned his shirt to reveal the reactor. Hey, Tony, don't worry about how I know it, but you have to give me something to gag the board of directors. Oh shit, this thing is really good. Obadiah looked at the reactor on Tony's chest in surprise, and fastened Tony's buttons. No, this only belongs to me. I will take out the technology, but you have to give me some time, Stan. Tony said stubbornly to Obadiah, and said that it was impossible to take out the small reactor, but you can study other things, but it will take time. Okay Tony, I will try my best to convince the board of directors. You should go home and rest first. Obadiah looked at Tony helplessly and said to him seriously, saying that he would help him. Thank you, Stan, Tony said gratefully to Obadiah and walked out slowly. It's okay, it's all as it should be. Obadiah answered Tony with a chuckle. After Tony left, his eyes became fierce and vicious. So, I decided to shut down the weapons manufacturing department of Stark Industries. And never activate it again. Carl sat on the sofa and watched the scene of Tony's press conference on TV. After he said those words to close the weapons manufacturing department of Stark Industries, Carl knew that Iron Man was about to be born, and the battle with Iron Overlord was about to begin. Not far away. Jisoo, how much money do we have after we sell the stocks? Carl thought for a while and pressed Bluetooth to ask Jisoo remotely. Jisoo sold all Stark Industries stocks when Tony entered the press conference. Boss, we now have $6 billion US. A very fast electronic voice came from Bluetooth, and then told him how much money he now has. 6 billion, so much. When Stark Industries stock plummets to the bottom of the cliff again, buy them all. If someone sells the shares, buy them all at a low price. Carl said to Jisoo on the other side of Bluetooth. After all, Stark Industries will, but the value will skyrocket. If you get more shares now, you won't have to worry about money in the future. Yes, boss. Chapter 28 Mark E. Advertise here. Chapter 28. Mark II. After Tony returned to his villa, he went to his underground studio, pulled up the model of Mark I, and deleted some bulky parts to simplify its size and increase flexibility, and then started design Mark II. JARVIS. When Yingson wakes up, ask him to come to my studio to find me. I need him, Tony said to the artificial intelligence JARVIS while fiddling with the virtual model. Yes sir. JARVIS's voice rang in the studio, and they even began to assist Tony in designing the battle suit. After Carl finished training super ability with the perfect super ability training box today, he found that 3 months had passed and he felt 3 different energies entering his body, and then he felt as if he had mastered those 3 super ability. For the sake of experiment, he was thinking about his farm in his mind, and the next second he disappeared from the place, and then appeared in his farm in the suburbs of New York. Seeing this scene, Carl couldn't help but smile, and then focused his attention on his eyes, looking at the land in front of him. Carl's eyes fired red lasers, which shot hard into the farm land, even punching 2 big holes in the ground. Carl then looked at a machine on the farm. After concentrating his mental strength, he slowly lifted up the nearly 1-ton agricultural machine, using psychokinesis. After repeated tests by Carl, he has mastered the 3 super abilities. Because of the influx of 3 energies, the number of shadow ninjas he can summon has increased a lot. He can now summon at least 1,500. The Black Shadow Ninja is even more proficient in freezing fruits, perhaps because of psychokinesis. After Carl condensed 2 pairs of frost wings on his back, flight speed was even faster, and he could also be blessed with psychokinesis. Carl finally stood in the farm and looked at his masterpiece with satisfaction, and then summoned the Shadow Ninja to tidy up the farm. After finishing it, I returned home to Queens with a thought. The next few days were as usual, spending time with Aunt May, going on various dates with Aunt May, and then buying a large amount of Stark Industries stock when it was at its lowest, until one day. Order. Carl's cell phone rang. After picking it up, Carl looked at the unfamiliar number. Although he was a little confused, he still connected. Which one? Hey Carl, it's me. Come to my house quickly and show you a good thing. After Carl finished speaking, he heard Tony's yawning voice and invited him to his house to show him a good thing. Carl didn't have to. Everyone knows it's Mark II. Okay, I want to see what good stuff can make you call me in person. Carl teased Tony with a chuckle and agreed. I guarantee you will be surprised. Okay, come on, hang up. Tony said to Carl with a proud tone, and then hung up the phone. Carl shook his head and smiled, and then planned to go to Tony's home. After all, even though he knew it was what, but he still looked forward to it. After all, it was a steel battle suit. Then Carl disappeared with a thought and appeared in the living room of Tony's house the next second. JARVIS, where is Tony? Carl asked the artificial intelligence JARVIS in the living room. Mr. Carl, the boss is in the underground studio now. The boss has given instructions. Just go down as soon as you arrive. Jarvis's voice sounded in the living room, and then told Carl the location of Tony. Carl then walked down and arrived at the underground studio. Carl saw Tony and Yingson playing with a silver battle suit. Carl walked up slowly and said, "Is this what you call a good thing? It's not bad. He looks quite handsome. Hey Yingson." Carl walked to the side of Yingson and Tony and said hello to Yingson before surrounding the silver battle suit in the middle. He looked at it. Okay, this is Yingson and I's masterpiece in a few days. I'll name it Mark II. Tony said to Carl arrogantly, like a child showing off his new toy to others. Hey Carl, you're here. Yingson also greeted Carl. Yes, I just don't know if it's antifreeze or not, what do you think, Tony? Carl put a hand on the steel battle suit with a smirk on his face, and then the area touched by Carl began to freeze. Hey, no, it's not complete yet. When you say that, I seem to have forgotten something. Tony yelled at Carl in a hurry and stopped Carl from freezing his big toy. Have you considered the situation of freezing at high altitude? If your engine goes out and the power system freezes, you will be smashed into steel and flesh. Carl looked at Tony speechlessly, but he didn't expect that he still forgot about the altitude. In the icy situation, if he hadn't reminded him, he would have had to face a life or death moment again. Oh shit, you're right, Yingson, let's transform it. JARVIS, order me titanium alloy, aviation materials, metal from the Angel satellite. Tony suddenly realized, and said to Carl fearfully, and greeted Ying Mori renovated the steel battle suit and asked JARVIS to place metal orders for other companies. Carl shook his head and smiled, and then Tony wore a steel battle suit and sparred with the Shadow Ninja summoned by Carl. Although the Shadow Ninja was only as strong as a Special Forces soldier, Tony was still fooled around without the intelligent assistance of JARVIS. Even more, it's a steel battle suit with several knife marks left on it. In the end, the Black Shadow Ninja was defeated with JARVIS's only assistance. At this time, Pepper suddenly walked into the studio below and happened to see Tony wearing a steel battle suit with knife marks on it. Carl and Yingson looked at Tony with expressions of fun, and then clinked their wine glasses. Hey, Tony, what are you talking about? Didn't you say you won't make weapons anymore? Pepper looked at Tony angrily, but Carl saw that Pepper's eyes were looking at the steel battle suit. The knife mark was obviously worried about Tony. Carl and Yingson looked at each other, and both of them smiled tacitly. Chapter 29 Researching Super Genes. Advertise here. Chapter 29. Researching Super Genes. Pepper, listen to me, there is no danger, this is not this. Tony explained to Pepper in a hurry, even a little incoherently. Is this Tony the big boy's new toy? Ha 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 ha. Carl said jokingly to Tony and Pepper, and even looked at each other and Yingson later, and both of them laughed. Walter. Pepper looked at Carl and Yingson in confusion, not understanding what he was talking about, and Tony looked at Carl and the others helplessly, then directly pulled Pepper away and took off the steel battle suit. Carl looked at the reactor on Tony's chest, seemed to be the same one he had in the cave. He immediately understood what he asked Pepper to do, and instantly got goosebumps when he thought of this. Come on Yingson, let's go drink upstairs. Tony still has to flirt with his little assistant. Carl turned to Yingson and said, and even said the last sentence loudly in the direction of Tony and Pepper, and Yingson said Sen shook his head and smiled, watching Carl's mischief. Carl, after I upgrade my steel battle suit, I will definitely beat your ass. Tony's voice came from the direction they left. Carl smiled casually, and then led Yingson to the living room above. Went over and the two started drinking at the bar. And Tony pulled Pepper to replace the reactor. After some twists and turns, he successfully replaced the reactor and asked Pepper to get rid of the old reactor. He also said, I have many shortcomings, one of which is the most obvious. Just love the new and hate the old. Then he handed the old reactor to Pepper and walked to the living room. Pepper looked at Tony's leaving figure and the reactor in his hand and fell into deep thought. After thinking for a while, he put the reactor away. What Tony didn't know was that it was precisely because of Pepper's move that the reactor was in the original timeline. Gwei saved his life. When Tony came to the card living room, he happened to see Carl Yingson drinking at the bar. After all, Tony's house had nothing but wine. The food was bought by Pepper, but it was usually burgers, pizza and the like. Carl and Yingson only had you can drink here. Hey Carl, Yingson, there is a charity ball tonight, how about we go and have fun together? There will be a lot of hot girls, you can let off some steam. Tony took a glass of wine and poured a glass and suggested to Carl and Yingson, although the ball was held in his name, he now knew that it was not Obadiah's fault. I'd better forget it, I'm not interested in this. Yingson said a little uninterested, and refused Tony's invitation. Me, I have a woman, let's forget it. Carl said to Tony calmly after taking a sip of wine. Hey, hee, don't be such a spoiler. Want to go and have fun together? Even if you don't do that, can you still have fun? By the way, I didn't expect your taste to be so unique, Carl. Tony said helplessly to Carl and Yingson, then thought of something and said to Carl with an, I understand, expression on his face. By the way, use the favor you owe me to perfect the super gene that Stark Industry has been researching. I want that thing, and I want a super gene with no side effects. Carl saw Tony's expression and naturally knew what he was talking about, and then said to him seriously. Why do you want that thing? You don't want it for her, right? After hearing Carl's words, he was a little suspicious, and then he immediately thought of something and exclaimed. Yes, I want to use it myself. You can just research it. Tell me if you need anything, or you can go to some university laboratories to recruit people. Carl said to Tony calmly, directly telling him his plan and telling him suggested. What are you talking about? Yingson looked at Carl and Tony in confusion, not knowing what riddle they were playing. I'm talking about letting Tony research and perfect the super gene of Stark Industry. I want to inject my lover and myself. The super gene can enhance the physique, increase lifespan, and even restore youth. My lover has been a little anxious recently, so I plan to help she is younger again. Carl explained to Yingson calmly that this was not a secret that could not be told, although Carl and Aunt May did not hide it when they were together. This is a bit difficult. After all, I'm not an expert in biology. I can do some research and recruit people in university laboratories. Tony agreed after hearing what Carl said. After all, Carl said he was using favors. It's also good for you if you study it. Looking at how weak you are now, I doubt you can last 3 minutes. Carl said to Tony calmly, and then raised his brows, as if you were wondering whether you could do it or not. Said to Tony. Fake. I can definitely do it. How can it only be 3 minutes? I forget it. I still have a big hole in my chest. I can't inject the super gene. I have thought about it myself, and if I inject it, the reaction will be direct. Let the missile fragments follow the blood vessels and enter the heart. Tony yelled at Carl loudly at first, and then explained the reason a little lonely. I can help you take out the fragments, and even help you repair the big hole in your chest, but not now. You should study the super gene first. There are some things I can't tell you. Carl said to Tony casually. What? Can you help me remove the fragments and repair the wounds? Okay. Then let me build a laboratory first. Tony was surprised at first, but after hearing Carl say it was not the time, he was helpless. Had to prepare to study super genes first. Okay. See you in the evening. Yingson, please come with us. And you can't stay at home all the time. I'm leaving first. Carl stood up and said to Tony and Yingson, and persuaded Yingson, and then used teleportation disappeared in place. Tony and Yingson were left staring with big eyes. They knew that Carl had to leave into a dark place, enter the world of shadows, and now he just disappeared. Not even into the dark shadows. Shit, Carl's strength has increased again. I will spank Carl's ass hard when the genetic research is done. By the way, Yingson, you should also get the injection when the time comes. Tony swore directly at the place where Carl was sitting. Then thought of something and said to Yingson. Research first, I might be able to help a little. Yingson said disapprovingly. Okay, I'll build a laboratory first. By the way, I've been planning funds and supplies to support your hometown recently. You don't have to worry too much. Tony said to Yingson, and he didn't do what he promised before. Forgot, but already making preparations. Thank you, Tony. Yingson thanked Tony sincerely. Chapter 30 Nick's Plan. Advertise here. Chapter 30. Nick's Plan. After Carl returned home, he found that Aunt May had come back and was already busy in the kitchen. Because Carl actually liked Chinese food, Aunt May had been learning to cook authentic Chinese food these days, and she had been eating Chinese food at home. Carl left. He went behind Aunt May and hugged her waist, smelling the fragrance of Aunt May. Tony invited me to a dance tonight. How about you go with me? Carl said softly, leaning his head on Aunt May's shoulder. What? Tony Stark invited you to a dance, and you went to rescue him yesterday. I don't want it. There are a lot of things at home. Aunt May turned her head to look at Carl in surprise, and then said to Carl a little lonely. Well, I rescued him from the Middle East yesterday. Let's go together, okay? Is there anything you can do for Wanda and the others, eh? Carl looked at Aunt May tenderly and said, and kissed her on the mouth. Take a bite. Okay. Aunt May agreed after seeing Carl's expectant eyes. The reason why she refused was because she felt that she was old and faded, and Carl was still young and handsome. It didn't look good for them. Suitable. These are all caused by Aunt May's own psychology. She now looks not much different from a girl in her 20s, but in comparison, Aunt May looks more mature, like a ripe peach, and the years seem to no marks left on her face. Okay, how about we go together tonight? No need to cook. Let the little guys order pizza, and I will take you to buy a dress. Carl untied Aunt May's apron and whispered softly said. But didn't you already give me a dress last time? Wouldn't it be nice for me to wear that? Aunt May looked at Carl a little doubtfully, because the dress before didn't look cheap, but now it was because of a ball. She was a little puzzled that she wanted to buy a dress again. You are now my lover, and I am now a shareholder of Stark Industries, because I sold all the stocks at a high price when Tony held a press conference, making a total of $6 billion, and when Tony announced the closure of the weapons manufacturing department after that, I bought a large amount and acquired some scattered shares, so I am now one of the shareholders of Stark Industries, and you will probably have to buy clothes every day in the future. Carl looked at Aunt May and explained with a smile. What? A shareholder of Stark Industries? You? Okay, let's go then. Aunt May looked at Carl with surprise. Carl suddenly becoming a shareholder of Stark Industries was something she had never expected, even though the weapons manufacturing department that Tony closed down, Stark Industries is also a behemoth. Okay, let's go, let me see how beautiful my Aunt May will be after putting on a gorgeous dress. Carl said frivolously to Aunt May, and Aunt May rolled her eyes at Carl, and then Carl took the Aunt May drives her Lamborghini to a couture dress shop in Manhattan. After Carl took Aunt May into the haute couture dress shop, someone immediately greeted him. Both Carl and Aunt May had outstanding temperaments. At first glance, they looked like they were both rich and noble. Then the two of them started customizing in the store. Try on various dresses. On the other side, Nick Fury knew that Tony Stark suddenly returned from the Middle East, and immediately called Phil Coulson to understand the situation, but every time Phil Coulson could only make an appointment with Pepper, and could not even see Tony Stark. And Tony Stark's identity is not an ordinary businessman, otherwise how could Phil Coulson wait honestly? It is estimated that they directly broke into Tony's mansion with an agent and directly forced him to confess what happened. Although S.H.I.E.L.D. is to protect the safety of the world, it also depends on your identity. You don't have identity, capital, connections, no matter how rich you are, you can how about that, I can't be easily manipulated by S.H.I.E.L.D. Because they can even create various certificates at will, including CIA, FBI, and other identities. Unless the other party cannot control it, or the identity, capital, relationship, or are too tough, which prevents them from using special means, then they will be honest. Waiting. And although Nick Fury was not sending an agent to monitor Carl, he did not let go of the news at all. He even knew that Carl had become a shareholder of Stark Industries, and he even suspected that the account holder they could not trace before was the one who owned the account. Carl, and speculates on Carl's connection to Tony Stark's kidnapping. After Tony Stark was kidnapped, Carl went crazy buying when the stock fell. This was not normal at all. However, because of his fear of Carl, Nick Fury did not take any action. He just observed in secret, or prepared to get some information from Tony. It's not that he hasn't thought about taking down Aunt May or Wanda, but he will probably fall out with Carl completely, or even directly massacre S.H.I.E.L.D. He is racking his brains and still doesn't understand where those ninjas come from. It seems that they can't be killed at all. Endless. This was one of the reasons why he was afraid of Carl. Even Carl himself could disappear on the spot. Otherwise, why would Carl let him go? He may not have the means to punish Carl's freezing ability, but don't forget that there are mutants in this world, and he also talked to Charles, who said that Carl was not a mutant. If he wanted to deal with Carl, Nick must change mutants' current situation. Nick naturally cannot agree. He knows that many laboratories are studying mutant, even their S.H.I.E.L.D., not to mention that this idea cannot pass the Security Council, and even government members will not agree to this price. It was too big, so naturally it fell apart. Carl had no idea that Nick Fury had even contacted Charles in order to deal with him. Otherwise, he would probably find an opportunity to kill Nick directly. After all, he would not let someone who was always thinking about him exist. He was indeed in Nick's pocket before. He felt the existence of the quantum pager, but how could an old fox like Nick not have a backup plan? He must have arranged a backup plan before coming to see Carl, even if he didn't know that Carl knew about it at the time. Chapter 31 Attending the Dance. Advertise here. Chapter 31. Attending the Dance. In the evening, Tony and Yingson had already driven their sports car to the dance venue. After arriving, they were photographed by a large number of reporters. Yingson was a little uncomfortable, but Tony dealt with it like a veteran, and whispered to Yingson. Why hasn't Carl come yet? Did you call him just now? I'll call him, he said right away, but I haven't seen anyone yet. Yingson faced the camera with an awkward smile, then leaned into Tony's ear and said. Boom. 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 As soon as Yingson finished speaking, a black sports car drove up not far away, and it was the kind they had never seen before. After all, Carl's Lamborghini has not yet released this model at this time, let alone he is a fast-changing car. Slowly parked the car at the end of the red carpet, Carl opened the door and stepped out of the car, wearing a black suit, which set off his burly figure. Carl walked to the other side, opened the door of the Lamborghini, and wore a red dress. Aunt May slowly got out of the car. The appearance of the two of them directly attracted the attention of the audience. Carl's tall and handsome appearance, and Aunt May's mature and sexy charm. Aunt May held Carl's hand and walked to the hotel, while the Lamborghini automatically started to go to the hotel. Drive away from the parking lot. Hey, he is actually one of the current shareholders of Stark Industries. Carl Augustin Jong. Don't stop me, I want to get his first-hand report. A reporter looked at his phone and exclaimed, and squeezed towards Carl's position. But he was not the only one who discovered the news. Many reporters found out and wanted to interview Carl immediately, but Carl almost ignored them and walked directly in the direction of Tony and Yingson with Aunt May. I would like to introduce to you, my lover, May Parker. Carl introduced to Tony and Yingson lightly, and even directly changed Aunt May's last name, because May Parker was the name of his and Richard Ben Parker changed it after he got married. Carl now directly changed it to his own surname on his own initiative. Aunt May glared at Carl with shame and anger, but did not object. Hello, I'm Carl's friend. I think you should know me. I'm Tony Stark. Tony introduced himself to Aunt May in a rude manner, and even wanted to hug him, but after seeing Carl's murderous eyes, it immediately changed to a handshake, but Carl shook hands with Tony first and looked at him with a smile. Yours. Just call me Yingson, I'm also Carl's friend. Yingson saw the way Carl treated Tony just now, and he was very sensible and didn't make any move. Hello, I am Carl's lover. Aunt May was already a little embarrassed after saying it. After all, she would always be a little uncomfortable facing Tony and Yingson. After all, Tony Stark is a billionaire, and even Stark Industries, if it weren't for Carl, she wouldn't have the qualifications to know him. As for Yingson, although she didn't know his identity, it was probably not unusual for him to become friends with Carl and Tony. Okay, let's go in. Remember to have fun later. After Tony finished speaking, he walked into the hotel dance party first. Carl took Aunt May in too. After Yingson entered, he found a place to stay. Tony looked around as if looking for today's goal. Tony walked to the bar and asked for a glass of wine, and the Phil Coulson agent next to him happened to see Tony and said, "Hello, Mr. Tony Stark, I'm Phil Coulson agent." "Oh yes, what are you?" "Yes, Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency." "Yes, yes, oh god, you should really change that name." "Yes, they all say that. I know you are not having a good life now. There are still some unknown things I need to know. When will you have time?" "How about tomorrow? I'll wait for you at the Stark Industrial Building at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." "Oh okay, just tomorrow. Yes, I have something to do now, bye." Tony didn't listen to Phil Coulson at all, and then he saw Pepper in a blue dress, and it was still backless, and he answered perfunctorily. Phil Coulson then left and walked to Pepper's place. "Hey, Pepper, you look so beautiful today. Why haven't I seen this dress before?" Tony walked up to Pepper and said, "This is the new one I bought as a birthday gift. Does it look good?" Pepper was a little surprised when she saw Tony's arrival, but she still explained that Tony had asked her to buy this dress with his money before, so it was considered a gift from him. Her birthday present. "Not bad. Let's dance. Come on, come on." Tony pulled Pepper onto the dance floor and the two started dancing to the elegant music. "I'm actually dancing with my boss, and I'm wearing a backless outfit." "That's enough." Pepper looked at Tony helplessly and said, "Should I fire you? After you fire me, you probably won't even remember your social security account number. The first one is 5. Anything else, I'll leave the rest to you. Okay, do you want to go out and get some fresh air?" "Okay, let's go." Then Tony took Pepper to the balcony outside, and Carl took Aunt May to dance on the dance floor. Although he was not very good at it, Aunt May taught him, but he also enjoyed it, while Yingson danced with the hot girl made eye contact, and the two were chatting in the same place. It seemed like they were going to discuss the origin of life tonight. "How about it? I can dance well, my Aunt May," Carl said with a wicked smile as he looked at Aunt May. "Yes, but it would be better if you don't step on my feet. I really don't understand why you are so stupid that you can't even teach me," Aunt May said helplessly to Carl. After all, Carl knew nothing about dancing. "Every time whenever I step, I will inadvertently step on Aunt May's high heels." "Okay, let's not dance anymore. Let's go and get some air." Carl looked at Aunt May, who was a little helpless, and said with a smile, then he put his arm around Aunt May's waist and walked to the other balcony. After Tony and Pepper chatted for a while, Pepper wanted to drink something, and then he walked to the bar and asked the bartender to get it. At this time, a woman walked up to Tony, and it was Christine, who had a one-night stand with Tony. Everhart, she handed Tony a plate of photos. "Look, this is what you call closing the weapons manufacturing department and then conducting arms transactions privately. Do you know a town called Mikala? The terrorists here use weapons from Stark Industries," Kristen said to Tony with a sneer. "I didn't sign the order for these weapons. When were these photos taken?" Tony looked at the pictures and asked Kristen. "It was filmed yesterday." Kristen looked at Tony coldly and said slowly. Then Tony took these photos and found Obadiah not far away, ready to question him about the situation. Chapter 32 Mikala's Terrorist Attack. Advertise here. Chapter 32. Mikala's Terrorist Attack. Tony walked up to Obadiah with the photo, handed him the photo in his hand, motioned for him to look at it, and slowly said, "Stan, I remember I didn't sign these weapons orders. Tell me what's going on." "Oh Tony, don't be so rigid. After all, we are an arms company. These are the orders I signed. What's more, other members of the board of directors do not agree to close the weapons manufacturing department." Obadiah said to Tony with a smile, and added the rest of the board made the decision. "No, I am the chairman of Stark Industries, and I even hold the most shares," Tony said stubbornly to Obadiah. After all, let alone Yingson's hometown, let alone Obadiah, even sold weapons to terrorists. "Okay Tony, don't worry about money. It's time to take photos. Come on, yes, look at the camera." Obadiah hugged Tony and said to the reporters in front of him, "Tony, the board of directors even wants to kick you out. Because you closed the weapons manufacturing department, Stark Industries stock fell to freezing point. It was me who suggested it." After taking the photo, Obadiah leaned into Tony's ear. He said, patted Tony's shoulder one last time and left. Tony looked at Obadiah's back and didn't know what he was thinking. He was already a little suspicious at the moment. After all, the terrorists who kidnapped him used weapons from Stark Industries. Even after learning about the board of directors' decision, Tony smiled disdainfully. Laugh and kick him out. If he only owns 39% of the shares, it is really possible. But after he closed the weapons manufacturing department, some directors thought that Stark Industry had no future, and they all approached Tony to sell their shares. Although each person did not hold many shares, his current shares reached 45%. In addition, Carl is also a shareholder of Stark Industries and holds 8%. Together, they have exceeded 50%. What are they going to do to kick him out? After thinking of this, Tony found Yingson and Carl, and then told them his guess and what happened in Yingson's hometown. He even decided to put on a steel battlesuit and destroy all the terrorists and weapons in Migula. After Yingson heard this, I felt a little depressed. After all, it was my hometown. Carl said it's up to you, and then Tony drove home with Yingson, because he had already made the Mark III, and the Mark II happened to be 2 steel battlesuits. In order to make up for Yingson, Tony decided to make Yingson put on the Mark II and went with him to deal with the terrorists, and then immediately asked Jarvis to add weapons to the 2 battlesuits through his mobile phone. Carl thought for a while and decided to go and have a look. After that, he also ended the dance. When he walked to the door, the Lamborghini automatically drove in front of Carl. Then he drove Aunt May home. After arriving home, Carl disappeared into the living room with a thought. Appeared in Tony's underground studio the next moment. At this time, Tony and Yingson were already preparing to put on the steel battle suits. As the robotic arm extended, less than 30 seconds later, 2 gold-red steel battle suits were put on Yingson and Tony, and then they nodding to Carl, he broke through the roof and flew into the sky. Although Yingson wore it for the first time, he could also flexibly control the battle suit with the assistance of Jarvis. After Carl shook his head, a pair of blue ice crystal wings appeared on his back, flying along the roof that Tony and Yingson crashed through, and flew in the direction of them. Because of psychokinesis, Carl's speed is much faster than before, and he used psychokinesis to form a sharp triangular shield in front of him. He was able to reduce a lot of wind resistance, and added psychokinesis to the ice crystal wings behind him. He soon caught up with Tony and Yingson. Although he could teleport directly, he had never been to Migula, so he couldn't teleport. If you want to see the world of shadows one city at a time, you might as well just fly with Tony and Yingson. Hey, Carl, that's cool. Do you want to see who is faster? Tony's voice suddenly came from the steel battle suit on the right. Okay, let's compare. Carl also wanted to know his current limit speed, so he agreed to Tony, and with a flash of blue light on his body, he surpassed Tony and Yingson in an instant, and Tony was not far behind and was running at full power. Sen had no choice but to follow. Carl was able to far surpass Tony at the beginning, but when he accelerated up, he couldn't, and he even felt that he was a little exhausted. Okay Tony, you win. Let's find Migula first, Carl said to Tony next to him. Okay. Tony, Yingson, and Carl soon arrived at Migula. At this moment, the town had been occupied by terrorists. As a result, many people had to leave their homes and flee. Even those who were captured were divided into men and women. The men were either killed or killed. And women are. Bang bang. Tony and Yingson dropped from the sky in steel battle suits and faced terrorist attacks inside. They almost punched each other and even attacked with palm cannons. However, the terrorists immediately took hostages around and were suspended in the air watching the scene. He knew Tony could handle it. Sure enough, Tony's battle suit's automatic aim locked on the head of each terrorist, and then struck within 0.1 seconds. After that, all the terrorists fell, and then Tony destroyed all Stark Industries weapons. After passing the Jarvis test, he took Yingson to the next place and climbed to about 50 meters before they took off. Boom. Tony was shot down by a tank shot like a timeline. Yingson called Tony in a panic on the channel. I'm fine, Yingson, oh shit. After Tony stood up from a large pit, he fired a mini missile at the tank and walked directly in the opposite direction. Boom. Carl looked at this scene and couldn't help but think of a sentence. A real man never looks back at the explosion. He definitely didn't say it, otherwise Tony would probably be in trouble again. Then Tony took Yingson to clean up all the Stark Industries weapons and terrorists around him, and then landed in front of Carl. How are you? Are you envious, Freeze boy? Tony said to Carl with a shy smile. Okay, don't be shy. Go back first. I'll take you back. If you enter America directly, I won't believe them unless they send 2 F-22s to shoot you down. Carl said to Tony speechlessly. No, I said I will never enter that world of yours again. Goodbye. Tony refused with a face full of rejection, then lowered his mask and ran away. Carl looked at this scene and smiled inexplicably. See you later. You cried, then took Yingson into the shadow world and headed for New York. Chapter 33 Tony encounters a fighter jet. Advertise here. Chapter 32. Tony encounters a fighter jet. Tony flew into the skies over America at high speed and was immediately detected by the Air Force radar. As expected, as Carl said, after a period of time they sent 2 F-22s to intercept Tony, and after calling many times, they launched an attack, and the Air Force commander also found Rhodes, and Rhodes thought for a while and dialed Tony's number. Hey Tony, our Air Force base's radar has detected an unidentified flight object. Have you researched some new technology? You'd better tell me early, otherwise I will shoot it down. Rhodes dialed Tony's phone number. Said. No, Rhodes, I'm not researching any technology. What are you doing? Why is it so noisy there? What are you talking about? I'm driving, so you know. Well, since it's not yours then we'll shoot it down. After finishing speaking, Rhodes hung up the phone, and then let the fighter jets start to attack. Tony swore and started to dodge the fighter jet's attack, and even the opponent directly launched a missile. Tony asked Jarvis to release jamming bombs and barely destroyed the opponent's missile. Then he called Rhodes' number. Hey Tony, it's too late for you to tell me that thing is yours. Why is it still so noisy in your place? Rod, I'm running, so the sound is loud. Hey, you just told me you were driving. I first started going to the park and now I'm running, you know Rod, boom. Tony, what's going on? Why are there explosions there? Hey, okay Rod, that thing is mine, I'm in there, stop attacking now. What, you're in there? Stop attacking and let the opponent leave, now. Rhodes walked to an earphone, picked it up and immediately said to the two pilots inside the fighter jet. After all, if Tony was really shot down, it would be a big deal. Although Stark Industries has closed its weapons manufacturing department, it is still a behemoth, even a capital. Yes, Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes, the target has disappeared. Wah, oh my god. Rhodes breathed a sigh of relief after hearing the pilot's words, but then it was reported that it was under the fighter plane, and then the fighter plane passed by. Tony broke the wing of the fighter plane crashed, and the pilot ejected immediately, but the parachute it was stuck and could not be opened until it was about to fall to the ground. Tony opened his parachute and left, and the second fighter did not pursue it because of Rhodes' order. After Tony returned home, Carl and Yingson had returned long ago and were sitting on the sofa drinking his treasured wine. After Tony fell into the underground studio, the robotic arm could not take off his battle suit because many places were damaged. As a result, many parts got stuck. Hey, our baby Tony was beaten up by a fighter jet. Look at the bullet holes in this battle suit. It's so miserable, Carl said as he surrounded Tony with a wine glass and teased Tony with a smile on his face. Tony, are you really being chased by a fighter jet? Ordinary bullets shouldn't be able to leave traces on your battle suit. Yingson also looked at Tony suspiciously after hearing what Carl said. After all, Tony's battle suit he was also involved in its creation, so he naturally knows how good its defense is. Oh shit, Carl, you are such a crow. The Air Force sent two F-22s to chase me. If Rhodes and I hadn't made a call, they would have chased me home. Tony looked helplessly at Carl said, he did not expect that what Carl said was so accurate, that there would actually be a fighter plane chasing him. Ha 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 ha. To use an Eastern saying, if you don't listen to good people, you will suffer the consequences. Carl said to Tony with a smile, and watched Tony being manipulated by the mechanical arm, and then Carl saw Pepper coming down and looking at the bullet holes in Tony's battle suit, he exclaimed. Is this a bullet hole? Tony, what are you doing? Are you going to fight terrorists? Tony. Hey, Pepper, I just went to destroy Stark Industries' weapons. Really, I'm fine. You believe me. When Tony explained to Pepper, Yingson quietly slipped away from the stairs. After all, this was a matter between Tony and Pepper, and he didn't want to get involved, and Carl disappeared in an instant, leaving Tony and Pepper alone. After some explanations, Tony asked Pepper to calm down. After all, the two of them actually had feelings for each other, but they didn't express it. Then Tony asked Pepper to go to his office and hack into Obadiah's computer. He wanted to know what was inside. What are the smuggled arms deals? Pepper didn't agree at first, but in the end she was moved by Tony's sincerity and agreed. On the other side, Carl took Yingson to the biological laboratory established by Tony. Because Yingson had two major doctorates in cell biology and medicine, Carl asked Yingson to help study genes together, and said that he would help Yingson develop vigorously. His hometown has even sent a batch of supplies to his hometown, along with the supplies prepared by Tony. Yingson naturally agreed. After he learned that his hometown had suffered a terrorist attack, he never thought of staying in his hometown to help the people there, but all he could do was a drop in the bucket. He had no money, no power, and could not change the current situation in his hometown at all. And Carl and Tony can naturally do it easily, but he doesn't want them to help him, but plans to work for Tony or Carl to let them help his hometown. He also knew that Tony and Carl would naturally help him if he asked, but how many times could they help him? And the brothers were still settling the scores, so he decided to use his ability to make his hometown better, just in a different way. It's not bad. I'll have to trouble you again in the future, Yingson. Carl said to Yingson after he walked into the laboratory. What's this? I should be the one thanking you. First you saved my life and then you helped my hometown. I can only use my little knowledge to repay you. Yingson shook his head and said to Carl, and then the two when people entered the laboratory, they found that most of the experimental equipment was available. It was definitely only Yingson who could understand these, and Carl knew nothing about them. What can you expect him to know as a high school graduate? Although he was a college student in his previous life, it's hard to explain. Chapter 34 The Ancient One visits. Advertise here. Chapter 34. Visit from the Ancient One. After Carl and Yingson visited the laboratory, Carl sent Yingson back to Tony's house, while he walked on the street and thought about his next plan. He was now barely friends with Tony and Yingson. He was thinking, do you want to take out the spider serum? After all, the spider serum is what directly created Spider-Man. With his worth, he now has the key formula of spider serum, so he can naturally breed super spiders and create spider serum, but he is not sure whether these things will be spread later, because spider serum is much better than Stark Industries' super genes. In the Civil War timeline, Peter even caught Winter Soldier's robotic arm with one hand, and defeated Winter Soldier and Falcon alone. It can be seen that it is powerful. If the military and S.H.I.E.L.D., Osborn, and other institutions knew about it, it would be in trouble. In the end, Carl decided not to take out the spider serum yet and wait for him to study it by himself after conquering a few biology masters. If you don't trust Tony and Yingson, even Natasha Romanoff can lurk next to Tony, and it's really hard for him not to spread the word. The reason why his steel battle suit was not snatched away by a large department is because Stark Industries still has the connections left by Howard, and in fact, all countries can produce steel battle suits, but what they lack is Tony's energy. That is, a small reactor. But even Obadiah can create an Iron Overlord after getting a design drawing. It can be seen that the steel battle suit is not impossible to create, so Carl is still cautious, mainly because he does not want Aunt May and the others to be disturbed and harmed. Carl was walking on the street and suddenly noticed that something was wrong around him, and even the buildings began to turn upside down. A blue light flashed in Carl's eyes. He knew who it was when he saw this scene. Now it finally appeared, and then a spark flashed around him. At the space door, a man wearing a yellow robe and a hood walked out of it. The person who came was none other than the Asgardian on Earth, Kamtaj's Sorcerer Supreme, Ancient One, who was also the holder of the Time Gem. Carl looked at the person in front of him cautiously and was ready to attack at any time. The surrounding temperature had already begun. Descends, and ice begins to form on the walls of the space. Don't be nervous, Carl. I won't do anything to you. According to my observation of you, you should know me. Ancient One said slowly while looking at Carl, who was ready to attack at any time. Hello, Sorcerer Supreme, His Excellency the Ancient One. Carl said calmly to the Ancient One, and secretly said that indeed, he had guessed that the Ancient One was secretly observing him before, but he did not expect that he would guess right. Haha, you really know me, and you should know a lot of things. I guessed it from the time you rescued Tony Stark and seized the opportunity to make him owe you a favor. The Ancient One said to Carl with a positive tone. So Ancient One Magician, are you here to see me? Carl did not relax his vigilance after hearing the Ancient One's words, but still maintained a state of attack at any time. I came to you just to tell you that you don't need to be afraid of me, and I won't do anything to you. I have traveled through multi-universe in spirit. I know my own ending, and I also know that this universe will be like most universes. So you can just go ahead and do it, as long as it doesn't endanger the Earth, I won't care about it. The Ancient One didn't care about Carl's condition and said to him slowly. Then what kind of future do you see now? Carl asked the Ancient One without relaxing his vigilance. I can't see the future now. Even with the Time Gem, since you entered this universe, the future has become extremely blurry and impossible to see through, but the ending has also become erratic. Whether it is good or bad depends on your thoughts. And based on my observations these days, you are not the kind of ambitious person, so I know you are on the side of the Earth. Ancient One still explained to Carl in a leisurely manner. As that's so, after Carl heard what Ancient One said, he reflected on himself. He didn't really seem to be a supervillain. He just wanted to guard his own 3/4 acre of land, and his wife the child is hot on the Kong, and since he came to the Marvel Universe, he has been preparing for self-preservation without thinking about what he is going to do. Well, you can come to Kamtaj when you have time. I believe you should know the location of Holy Place in New York. Ancient One looked at the thoughtful Carl and said, and then Carl appeared in the original neighborhood, and everything around him nothing has changed. Carl shook his head and continued to walk home. He didn't worry about what he needed to do. What he wanted was to do whatever he wanted. The Earth was where he lived anyway, so he was naturally obligated to help when he was asked to do so. If the Earth really was destroyed now, where can he go to be free? What's more, The Sky is Falling has a high level of customization. Now Odin of Asgard is still alive, and the Ancient One has not fallen yet. The Earth may not be destroyed, let alone and surprise. Carl is not in a hurry, but he has been wondering. The sign-in mechanism of the system has been penetrated, and even the system has not responded yet. After Carl came home with an idea, he looked at Wanda and Pilot on the sofa. Their faces were not good looking. Carl didn't know what happened, but turned to look at Aunt May. I told them that Tony is your friend. You can't hide these things from them forever. You have to tell them and have a good talk with them, Carl. Aunt May walked up to Carl and said softly. Okay, you go upstairs first. Carl said helplessly to Aunt May. After all, Aunt May had told them, and now the only thing left was to let them know the truth. Wanda, Pilot, I know you hate Tony because of that missile, but I can be 100% sure that Tony has never sold weapons to terrorists. These were all transactions that Obadiah privately made with those terrorists. I'm not excusing Tony, I'm just telling you the facts, and I'll be able to show you the evidence in 2 days. Chapter 35 Truth and Choice. Advertise here. Chapter 34. Truth and Choice. And you are not ordinary people. You too also have super abilities, but you don't have awakening yet. It should be because you are too young now and can't reach natural awakening. In 2 days, I will send Obadiah to let me show you the weapons orders signed by Asia and terrorists. Tony is definitely at fault. You can still hate him, and I won't even care if you attack him after awakening ability, but you are only 10 years old now. Do you really want to live with hatred until awakening ability awakening, and Obadiah will die soon? You think clearly, I can give you a chance to take revenge with your own hands. Carl sat on the sofa and said to Wanda and Pilot, who had their heads lowered, and told them the truth of the matter. How do they plan to still hate Tony, hate Obadiah, or seek revenge from Tony after awakening ability? Carl didn't want to care about these, and after all, Wanda and Pilot were adopted by him, and Tony was his friend. The most he could do was guarantee that Tony would not die. After Carl finished speaking, Wanda and Pilot fell into deep thought. It wasn't that they didn't believe what Carl said, but they felt incredible. Under the ruins of the house, their hatred for Tony Stark almost reached the extreme, but now they find that they hate the wrong person. He is a human being, and he also knows that he has super ability, but he has not yet awakened. Okay, you guys should go back and rest first, digest what I just said, and return to normal tomorrow. Don't let Aunt May worry about you. After Carl said to them calmly, he got up and walked upstairs, leaving Wanda and Pi behind. Lot's eyes widened. After Carl returned to the room, he found that Aunt May was still waiting for him. When he saw him coming in, he looked in his direction. I told them the truth, everything, including the fact that they have super abilities. Carl saw Aunt May looking over and told her what he told Wanda and others. But, they are only 10 years old, Carl, isn't this a bit? Aunt May said to Carl a little unbearably, not to mention that her enemy is not Tony, but she actually has super ability, and since there is no awakening, these two things are enough for them to digest for a long time. We can't let them live with hatred all the time. Obadiah will die in 2 days. If they figure it out, I will give them a chance to take revenge with their own hands. If they insist on seeking revenge from Tony, then as long as they wait only by awakening ability can they have a chance. Carl said slowly as he sat on the bed and hugged Aunt May. Okay, I think they will figure it out, these two poor children. Aunt May sighed and said, although he did not ask what Carl meant by giving them a chance to take revenge with their own hands, but he had a vague guess, because Carl had already told her that it was Obadiah who kidnapped Tony, so it was not difficult to make the connection. Well, let's take a rest. Pilot, I think we should listen to Carl. Didn't he say that he would give us a chance to take revenge in 2 days? Since he said that Sokovia's weapons were not sold by Tony Stark, although Tony Stark is responsible, but he really doesn't know that my enemy should be Obadiah, and Tony Stark is Carl's friend. It will be very embarrassing for him to be caught in the middle. Carl is not bad to us. Wanda said to Pilot next to her after Carl walked upstairs, but her tone was a little lonely. Okay, then let's choose to take revenge with our own hands. As for Tony Stark, I don't know what to do. Pierrot agreed after hearing Wanda's words, because Tony was not the murderer in the first place, at most he was just an accomplice, after all, he had always made the weapons. Pierrot also recalled the time when he was adopted by Carl. Carl would buy them whatever their brother and sister wanted, and no matter how expensive the thing was, Carl would not be stingy even if he wanted a game console, and Aunt May was also very fond of it. Taking care of them and treating them as if they were his own children, this period of time can be said to be the happiest time, and naturally he didn't want Carl to be embarrassed in the middle. After thinking about it, Wanda and Pilot also returned to their room and soon fell asleep. The other side. Obadiah came to the factory of Stark Industries and smiled as he looked at the huge amounts of steel mecha in front of him. These were the design drawings he got from the terrorists in the Middle East, as well as the wreckage of Tony Mark I. Because Carl was afraid of affecting the plot, Iron Overlord did not appear, and the butterfly effect subsequently occurred. When he was in the Middle East, he left Tony's armor where it was, and then took Tony and Yingson back to New York. Sure enough, the bald man who was not dead collected Tony's design drawings and the remains of the steel armor. He originally planned to blackmail Obadiah, but was killed by Obadiah's men. In the end, the drawings and the wreckage fell into the hands of Obadiah, so the scene just happened. When will it be finished? Obadiah asked the engineer next to him. The armor can be manufactured tomorrow, but we lack energy. It's like the reactor on Tony Stark's chest. The engineer thought for a while and replied to Obadiah. What? Don't you know how to build it? Isn't the prototype of that reactor here? Why don't you just shrink it? Just like Tony did. Obadiah pointed to the large reactor next to him and said to the engineer. No, it's not as simple as you think, and I'm not Tony Stark. The engineer said to Obadiah a little helplessly. After all, it's hard to put such a large reactor into a mecha. So easy, otherwise Tony wouldn't have received a subpoena for the hearing later. Shit, get it built as soon as possible. I'll take care of the energy. Obadiah cursed secretly to the engineer and left. He will still kick Tony out with the board of directors tomorrow and become the CEO himself. Position, and he has contacted other directors who will support him. The next day, afternoon. All the directors of Stark Industries were present, and Carl also learned what was going on from Tony, so he came to join in the fun. Oh, this is our new board member Carl. He is such a young and handsome guy. Ha 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 ha. Welcome. Obadiah greeted Carl enthusiastically and patted Carl on the shoulder, just like a senior. Take care of the younger generation. Haha. Hello, Director Obadiah. I'd better take my seat first. Carl said hello to Obadiah and then walked to his seat. His shares ranked 5th in Stark Industries, so his position is still relatively high. Soon after, all the board members arrived. Obadiah did not wait for Tony. He even thought that Tony would not come. He walked to the main seat and said, "Today's gathering of directors is to make plans for the future of our Stark Industries. Chapter 36 Tony's life hangs by a thread. Advertise here. Chapter 36. Tony's life hangs by a thread. So, I plan to take back Tony Stark's position as CEO. Because of his behavior, our Stark Industries stock has fallen sharply. Even the military has expressed dissatisfaction with us, so he is no longer suitable to be CEO position. We have made our fortune in arms, so I hope that the major directors will support me as the CEO of Stark Industries. I will restart the weapons manufacturing department and bring more benefits to everyone. After all, don't have trouble with the fragrant Franklin. What do you think, directors?" Obadiah stood on the top and gave a passionate speech, and denounced Tony's behavior of closing the weapons manufacturing department. Carl even wanted to laugh when he saw it. After Obadiah finished speaking, other people present the directors began to discuss it. It was definitely just a show. Obadiah had already bribed most of the directors to support him on the board of directors. I agree. Very good. Then I will serve as the CEO of Stark Industries and restart the weapons manufacturing department. Obadiah saw that most of the directors below supported him as he expected, with a smile on his face and solemnly, S-mouth said. I disagree. Just when Obadiah thought he was sure of victory, the door of the conference room was opened from the outside, and a voice of objection came in. Carl smiled after hearing the familiar voice, and Obadiah's face immediately darkened, and he was no longer as high-spirited as before. The person who came was none other than Tony Stark. After he knew that Obadiah was going to kick him out yesterday, he planned to attend this board meeting. Although he had already gotten up quite early, he did not expect that Obadiah had already started, but luckily I caught up. Hey Carl, you look at him like this and you have nothing to say. Can you sit still? Oh my god. Tony didn't even talk to Obadiah, but directly started fighting with Carl below. Hello. Obadiah felt an ominous premonition after seeing this scene. I'm leaving the opportunity to you, Carl said to Tony with a chuckle. Oh, okay, then I announce that starting from today, all of Obadiah's positions in Stark Industries will be revoked. If 2 people on my side agree, it will take effect if the shareholding exceeds 50%. After Tony finished speaking to Carl, he left. He went to the conference table and announced the decision to all directors. Oh no Tony, you don't own more than 50% of the shares, what you said doesn't count. Obadiah said to Tony with a victorious expression on his face. Oh, really? I now own all the shares that have not come to meet the directors, which adds up to 45% and Carl owns 8%. The 2 of us add up to more than 50%, so this order takes effect. Are you right, Carl? Tony said calmly after taking a look at Obadiah, and even asked Carl in the end. Definitely, you are right Tony. Carl raised his eyebrows and said to Tony. You. Obadiah didn't expect that Carl would be involved, causing him to lose. Seeing this, the other directors immediately agreed to Tony's proposal and directly Obadiah kicked out. Obadiah was so angry that he slammed the door and walked out. Carl and Tony looked at each other and couldn't help laughing when they saw this scene. Just now when Obadiah, Carl and others were in the conference room, Pepper entered his office according to Tony's instructions and inserted the USB flash drive given by Tony into the computer. The data in it directly broke through the firewall, and then all the data in Daya's computer can be viewed by Pepper. Then she found the video sent to Obadiah by the Middle Eastern terrorists, and saw from the video that Obadiah asked people to kill Tony, but because it was Tony, the terrorists spared it and took a video to Obadiah and said he needs to pay a price. Pepper covered her face and mouth in surprise. She never expected that Tony's uncle, Obadiah, would actually kill Tony. Later, she saw various arms orders privately traded with terrorists on her computer, and even there are blueprints for a huge steel armor, and it even shows that it has been manufactured in the factory. After she transferred all the files to the USB flash drive that Tony gave her, she immediately left Obadiah's office before he came back and prepared to show these things to Tony. After the meeting on the other side, Obadiah left first. When he returned to the office, he found traces of files being viewed. The only person in the company who could crack the Stark industrial firewall was Tony himself. He immediately thought of what he had done. Maybe he was exposed, and then drove to Tony's villa. He didn't care about so much now. As long as he got the reactor on Tony's chest, he still had a chance. And he already hates Carl now. If Carl hadn't been involved, he might have succeeded now. He blamed Carl for all the reasons for his failure, and also blamed Carl for the exposure of the matter. On the other side, Carl had already driven his Lamborghini home, and Tony had naturally gone home too. Tony originally invited Carl to have a drink, but Carl refused. After all, Carl planned to take Wanda, Pilot, and Peter shopping today, so Tony had to go home and continue studying the steel battle suit. Not long after Tony returned home, Obadiah also came to Tony's house, and Tony was the only one in the mansion at the moment. Yingson was still in the biological laboratory established by Tony, and Obadiah owned Tony's mansion. With the authority, he easily entered Tony's home. At this moment, Tony was on the phone with Pepper. Tony, listen, it was Obadiah who asked the terrorists to kidnap you, and he originally planned to kill you directly. The terrorists decided to kidnap you only after they knew it was you. You have to be careful with Obadiah, he has been secretly trading arms with terrorists from various countries, and even made a super large steel armor. Pepper's anxious voice came from the phone, and Tony listened in disbelief. After all, Obadiah is his only relative and uncle, and the person who wants to kill him is also his uncle. At first, he only suspected that Obadiah was conducting private arms transactions, but he did not expect that he would actually kill him. Life. Chapter 37 The Birth of the Iron Overlord. Advertise here. Chapter 37. The Birth of the Iron Overlord. When Tony was about to answer Pepper, Obadiah hit Tony from behind with the sonic weapon Tony had studied before. Tony froze immediately, and his face began to turn blue and purple. Obadiah saw after Tony could no longer move, he walked up to Tony and took off his phone. Hey, Tony, are you listening? What are you doing? Pepper's voice came from the phone, and Obadiah hung up the phone directly, then sat next to Tony and took a look from the box in his hand. Take out an extractor. And while talking to Tony about his experiences and thoughts over the years, he opened the extractor, placed it on the reactor on Tony's chest, and pressed it against the reactor. After a while, it was pulled out, along with the reactor on Tony's chest. He was also pulled out by Obadiah, after he pulled out the wire connecting Tony's body. After chatting with Tony for a while, he put the extractor and reactor into the box he brought just now, and then left Tony's mansion, not caring about Tony's life or death, and drove quickly to the Iron Overlord factory. On the other side, Pepper happened to meet Phil Coulson agent who was waiting for Tony, and then told him what she knew. Thinking that something was wrong with Tony just now, she immediately contacted Rhodes and asked him to go to Tony's villa to see what happened to him. After that, he took Phil Coulson to the factory where Obadiah made steel armor. Tony resumed action within a few minutes after Obadiah left, but because there was no reactor on his chest to provide energy to the magnet, the missile fragments in the blood vessels began to flow toward the heart, making Tony almost unable to walk normally. Sir, your current situation is not quite right. Do you need me to contact Ms. Pepper, Mr. Obadiah, Mr. Carl, Mr. Inson, and your bodyguard Happy? Jarvis's voice suddenly sounded in the living room. After all, he would always check Tony's status, and now he noticed something was wrong with Tony's status and asked because Tony asked Jarvis to set up emergency contacts, and he asked Jarvis to add Carl and Yingson later. Good, contact Carl and tell him to come and save me. Tony breathed a sigh of relief after hearing Jarvis's voice, and immediately said to Jarvis. Now only Carl can appear in front of him in a short time and save him. Okay, sir, we are contacting Mr. Carl. Carl on the other side returned home and was about to take the three little guys out when he saw Tony's call. Carl hesitated but answered it. Tony, what's wrong? What's the matter? Mr. Carl, this is Jarvis. Mr. Carl is in a very bad condition right now and asked me to call you to rescue him. Okay, I get it. After Carl answered the phone, he heard the voice of Jarvis. At the same time, he knew that Tony was in a very bad condition. Tony even asked Jarvis to ask him for help. Carl replied in a deep voice and hung up the phone. He had already guessed what had happened. What happened? Obadiah should have acted in advance. He had already taken away Tony's reactor. Thinking of this, Carl disappeared directly before he could say hello to Wanda and the others. I think we should wait a while, what do you think? Peter looked at Wanda and Pilot with helpless expressions. After all, the three of them had known about Carl's super ability for a long time, and they were already used to it. Wanda did not answer Peter, and walked to the sofa and fell into deep thought, because she just heard Tony's name. Pilot shrugged at Peter and also walked to the sofa and sat down. After Carl disappeared from the place, he appeared in Tony's mansion in an instant, and saw Tony lying on the ground moving to the underground studio. Carl suddenly appeared in Tony's underground studio with an idea, and then saw Pepper doing Tony's job. The souvenir that reads, Tony Stark has a warm heart. Carl took the reactor inside the glass and squeezed it. The glass was directly crushed by Carl. He then took the reactor in his hand and disappeared. The next moment, he appeared in front of Tony, helped him up, and controlled the reactor with psychokinesis. A wire was inserted into the joint on Tony's chest, and then the reactor was placed into Tony's chest. After 2 seconds, Tony felt much better. Thank God. Thank you, Carl, otherwise I would have died here. Tony said to Carl after heaving a sigh of relief, then stood up holding on to the wall and walked towards the underground studio. Come on, what's going on? Where's the reactor on your chest? Even though Carl knew what was going on, he still pretended to be confused and asked Tony. It's Obadiah. He used the sonic weapon I developed before to sneak attack me from behind, and I also learned from Pepper that he kidnapped me, but he wanted to kill me at first. He is my only relative. If not, forget it. I have to rush to the factory. Pepper said that Obadiah made a steel mecha, which should be the reason why he took the reactor. Tony said as he said walk to the middle of a round platform. Then several robotic arms appeared under the round platform, and Tony's steel battlesuit was attached. Then they began to assemble Tony, and the assembly was completed in a short time. At this time, Rhodes had also arrived at Tony's villa, and then I saw Tony wearing a steel battlesuit. Hey Tony, you are really awesome. Pepper contacted me just now and said something happened to you. What are you going to do? I mean, what can I do for you? Rhodes rushed underground. He said to Tony after the studio. Hey Rod, thank you. I'm fine now. Clear the sky for me if you can. After Tony finished speaking, he crashed through the roof and flew into his factory. Then Rod turned to look at Carl's position and found that there was no one in that place anymore. He rubbed his eyes and thought he had seen it wrong. Then he got into Tony's sports car and chased him. Obadiah on the other side is already in the factory, and took out the reactor that was taken out of Tony, and pressed it on the chest of the huge amounts of steel armor in front of him, and then the huge amounts of steel armor's eyes lights up, and at this point, the Iron Overlord is born. But after Obadiah heard the noise coming from the door of the factory, he immediately prepared to enter the Iron Overlord. It was Pepper, Phil Coulson and several S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who came. Pepper led them into the factory. He even searched for the steel armor he saw on Obadiah's computer. Chapter 38 Obadiah vs. Tony. Advertise here. Chapter 38. Obadiah vs. Tony. While Pepper was searching with Phil Coulson and several agents, Obadiah had already entered the steel armor. After seeing Pepper, he immediately knew who had touched his computer, and immediately attacked Pepper. Pepper launched an attack and rushed towards Pepper. Ah, fire! Fire immediately. When Pepper saw a huge amount of steel armor rushing toward her, she screamed in fright, and then ran outside, but Obadiah did not let her go. After finishing an agent with one punch, he immediately rushed to Pepper. He chased in the opposite direction, destroying everything that blocked him along the way. Finally, Pepper was caught up by the steel armor. Haha, Pepper, I originally wanted to let you go, but who let you get involved? Obadiah's voice came from the steel armor, and then he controlled the armor and waved his fist to attack Pepper. Tony arrived at the critical moment, kicked Iron Overlord away, and saved Pepper. Boom. Pepper, you hide first. Carl, help me protect Pepper. Tony first said to Pepper, and then said to Carl, who didn't know where he was through the language system. He knew that Carl must be watching there. Okay, I will, Tony. Carl replied after hearing the voice from the phone, and teleported to Pepper's side, taking her out because his teleportation could not carry her. Creatures teleport, so he can only leave with Pepper on foot. As for the world of shadows, he is mainly afraid that Pepper will not be able to bear it. Even Tony will die if he goes in for a while, let alone Pepper. Tony, you said you don't produce weapons, but you made the most powerful weapons in the world. Obadiah said to Tony, and controlled the Iron Overlord to attack Tony. Boom. Not to be outdone, Tony faced the Iron Overlord, but due to the difference in body size, the Iron Overlord was more like a power armor, while Tony's iron battle suit was more agile and flexible. Tony was directly knocked away by the Iron Overlord, and even hit him. On a highway, Iron Overlord followed closely, and then grabbed a car next to him and threw it at Tony. When Tony saw a woman and several children in the car, he immediately caught the front of the car, but due to inertia, he knelt down on one knee to barely catch it. After putting the car on the ground, the woman in the car was too frightened, stepped on the accelerator, and Tony arrived immediately. Afterwards, he was hit by a vehicle, but the car did not slow down. The woman in the driver's seat screamed and stepped on the accelerator, running over Tony and even dragging him for a distance. Carl stood looking at this scene not far away. I simply couldn't bear to look at it. It was so miserable. Even if he was beaten violently by Iron Overlord, he was actually hit by a car and crushed. Pepper even screamed and covered her mouth. Then Iron Overlord beat Tony. After that, Tony accelerated his ascent, trying to kill Iron Overlord by freezing at high altitude. Carl watched the two of them take off, and kept accelerating towards the sky. Even though Tony started to rise first, he was caught up by Iron Overlord after a while, and at this moment, the reactor energy in Tony's chest was running out, and even as low as 17%. Boom. Iron Overlord grabbed Tony's foot in the air and punched him, causing damage to the flight device on Tony's left foot. He could barely maintain his current height, but he still said something to Obadiah. How do you solve the problem of ice at high altitudes? Walter. Ah. After Tony finished speaking, Obadiah exclaimed in confusion. Then the Iron Overlord lost power due to ice at high altitude and fell directly. Carl and Pepper raised their heads and looked at the sky. Tony used one foot to the flight device and the palm cannon in his hand barely landed, and then said to Carl and Pepper not far away. Look, I'll take care of him right now, it's that simple. Carl looked at Tony with a non-smile, while Pepper covered her mouth and pointed behind Tony in surprise. The Iron Overlord did not die due to falling from a high altitude, and even Obadiah was only slightly injured, and then he knocked Tony away from behind and started to attack Tony more violently. He even controlled Tony with his right hand, and Gatling with his left hand shot at Tony. Tony looked at the data on the screen in front of him showing that the battle suit was constantly damaged, but found that he could not break free, and finally used the palm cannon to hit Gatling's control. The device also had a targeting system. Gatling stopped immediately, and then Obadiah controlled Iron Overlord to throw Tony out. At this moment, Tony was almost out of energy, and the reactor in his chest only had 4% energy left. Then Obadiah launched a micro-missile at Tony, but because the aiming system was destroyed by Tony, it could not hit at all. He roared angrily. Road. Shit, damn it, you destroyed my aiming system. He even fired mini-missiles in Tony's direction angrily. When Carl saw this, he knew he should take action. After all, he promised Wanda and Pilot to give them a chance to take revenge with their own hands. Then Carl disappeared in front of Pepper, and then appearing right in front of Iron Overlord, Carl slowly helped Tony up. Okay, leave it to me. You should go and rest. Your assistant is almost worried about you. Carl, it's all because of you. I failed. I was just one step away. One step. It's all because of you. After seeing Carl's appearance, Obadiah said angrily to him, and controlled the Iron Overlord to fight against him. Carl attacks. Carl looked at the Iron Overlord rushing over and shook his head and smiled. Then a blue light flashed in his eyes, and the surrounding temperature dropped instantly. Carl casually took a shot, and a 5-meter-long blue oriental dragon flew in the direction of the Iron Overlord. And it directly hit the Iron Overlord chest, knocking it away, and the place where it was hit was instantly frozen. Obadiah also wanted to control the Iron Overlord to stand up, but no matter how hard he tried, the Iron Overlord did not respond. This was the same as the ice at high altitude. Even Carl's ice was much stronger than when he had frozen at high altitude just now, causing the Iron Overlord to stand up. The Overlord immediately lost power, and Carl stepped forward and pulled down the reactor on the Iron Overlord. Then she teleported to Pepper and got the USB drive in her hand that recorded Obadiah's private transactions with terrorists, and then appeared in front of Tony. Chapter 39 Obadiah Death. Advertise here. Chapter 39. Obadiah Death. Tony, I want to pick up Obadiah for a while. He has to atone for the sins he committed before. Definitely, you can come and take a look. After Carl appeared in front of Tony, he directly told him his purpose, and without waiting for Tony to answer, he walked towards Obadiah's position. Oh shit, are you asking me? This is obviously a notice, you damn guy. Tony said angrily to Carl, and followed Carl to Obadiah, and Obadiah looking at Tony and Carl without saying a word, he knew that he had lost and had nothing to say. There was no point in talking more. Carl stepped forward and pulled Obadiah out of the Iron Overlord, and carried him in the other direction. Even the Iron Overlord was taken into the world of shadow by Carl using the Black Shadow Ninja. Naturally, Tony couldn't help but there will be opinions. After all, Carl saved his life. Besides, if Carl wanted, he could even make a steel battlesuit for him. Hey wait, sir, I am S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Phil Coulson. You should hand Obadiah over to us now. Phil Coulson walked up to Carl and Tony with several agents and said. Carl looked in front of him, the bald man's eyes narrowed slightly. Carl naturally knows who he is, Phil Coulson Phil, who was hailed as a good old man by many netizens in his previous life. But Carl doesn't think so. Phil Coulson is an agent. He has nothing to do with a good guy. He just does things better for others. Carl doesn't think that such a person is a good guy. He may only be interested in people with strong strength and background, relationships, resources, and owners are amiable. If you were an ordinary person, they would win it for you in minutes. Didn't Nick Fury tell you not to mess with me? Carl looked at Phil Coulson and several agents indifferently, and a blue light flashed in his eyes, and the surrounding temperature immediately dropped a lot. How do you know our director? Who are you? Don't move, raise your hands. Phil Coulson heard Carl say Nick Fury's name, and the tone was not good. He immediately raised his pistol and pointed it at Carl, and the same goes for the agent behind you. Hey, I think it's better for you to put down your guns. I'm sure you don't want to annoy him. After Tony saw Phil Coulson and several agents pointing pistols at Carl, he casually pointed at Phil Coulson said, and his tone was very unkind. After all, Carl was his friend. Although Phil Coulson had met him a few times, he didn't even remember the name of their organization. He must be helping Carl. Get out. Carl frowned, and then a blue energy burst out from his body, directly hitting Phil Coulson and several other agents. They were immediately frozen, and even their expressions were frightened. Looking like this, and still holding a pistol, Carl didn't look at them and just carried Obadiah forward and walked forward. Pepper also came over and saw this scene. She didn't speak. Although Phil Coulson brought several agents to help him just now, even if she spoke up, she would only get Carl's displeasure, and even Tony would be unhappy. She could still distinguish between sides, and then followed Tony. After Carl stood in the open space and waited for 2 minutes, a black Lamborghini appeared in their sight, and then drove in front of Carl. Wanda and Pilot walked down, and saw Tony with complicated eyes. When he glanced at him, Carl said calmly to Jisoo. Extremely fast, I need a display that can view the contents of the USB flash drive. Okay, boss. A very fast electronic sound sounded, and then an interface appeared on the car body. After Carl inserted the USB flash drive, a blue projection screen appeared. Carl then rummaged around and found the order for the Sokovia terrorists, and transferred it to Wanda and Wanda. Pierrot looked. Tony looked at Carl's black sports car in surprise. He didn't expect that Carl had such technology, and there was even something suspected of artificial intelligence. Look, these are the arms that Obadiah privately traded with the terrorists in Sokovia. Tony did not sell those weapons to them. Carl said calmly to Wanda and Pilot, and motioned to them come over to see. Wanda and Pilot also stepped forward and looked at the arms order on the blue projection screen. Hey, what are you talking about? What does it have to do with me? Tony asked Carl doubtfully, because he just heard his name. I rescued the two of them from the ruins of a house in Sokovia. They even had a Stark Industries missile in their house at that time. The two children watched the missile trapped in the ruins for several days. You tell me, does it matter? Carl said calmly to Tony, but Tony fell silent after hearing this, and even Pepper opened his mouth, not knowing what to say. I'm sorry. I hope you can give me a chance to make amends. Tony walked up to Wanda and Pilot and apologized to them sincerely. Now that the real murderer is here, you can avenge your dead parents and what happened to you. Carl said calmly to Wanda and Pilot, and threw Obadiah aside. In front of them, Obadiah's limbs were frozen on the floor, and two ice swords were condensed in front of Wanda and Pilot. Pilot looked at Obadiah in front of him, with a trace of hatred flashing in his eyes. He suddenly picked up the ice sword on the ground and stabbed Obadiah in the stomach. Then he fell to the ground in horror and shrank to the ground. Backing up, Pepper was about to stop her, but their 10-year-old appearance made them, but her feet were frozen by Carl and she couldn't move. Wanda, pick up the ice sword in front of you and kill him. Then you can avenge your parents and hometown. Otherwise, all you can do is let go of your hatred. Carl looked at Wanda indifferently and said. Wanda struggled to take it. He picked up the long sword in front of him and stabbed Obadiah in the chest. Then he squatted on the ground and cried. Carl walked to Wanda, held her in his arms and comforted her. This was probably the only way to make Wanda and the others let go of their hatred, otherwise the hatred would be with them for a long time. Carl didn't want them to live in hatred all day long. Inside, long-term pain is worse than short-term pain. Afterwards, Carl waved his hand, and Obadiah was killed directly by him. He took Wanda and Pilot into the car and left, leaving Tony and Pepper with their eyes wide open. After that, the two of them also went back, and at the same time the other side the agent also notified headquarters support, and even Phil Coulson was immediately frozen. Chapter 40 Nick and Carl's Deal. Advertise here. Chapter 40. Nick and Carl's Deal. After Carl brought Wanda and Pilot back home, Aunt May and Peter were waiting for them in the living room. Before Carl took action, he notified Speedy to tell Aunt May and others to take Wanda and Pilot there. Carl took Wanda after walking into the living room with Pilot. Aunt May looked at Wanda and Pilot worriedly. Okay, it's okay. Go back and take a nap. Let the past be in the past, okay, Wanda and Pilot. Carl said to them after leading the two of them into the living room. Thank you, Carl. Wanda and Pilot thanked Carl and then walked back to their rooms. After all, they also understood the reason why Carl just did what he did. Then Aunt May also drove Peter back to her room and sat down. Carl was leaning on the sofa. What's wrong? Why are you so worried? Carl turned to look at Aunt May and asked gently. It's okay. I just hope Wanda and Pilot can come out, because they are too young now, and even I don't have the courage. Aunt May said, leaning on Carl's shoulder. She knew it from the beginning what would happen after Carl asked Wanda and Pilot to go to his side. Carl had already told her his plan. She thought it was a bit cruel before, but she agreed so that they would not live in hatred in the future. It is really cruel to let two 10-year-old children kill people, even if she has never killed anyone herself, let alone. S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. After the remaining agents called for support, S.H.I.E.L.D. immediately sent other agents to support this side, and soon transported Phil Coulson and several other agents who were frozen together back to the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters for treatment, but their vital signs, although it is still stable, it will take at least a week to lift the ice, and there is no way Phil Coulson and the others can survive until that time. Even if they are hungry, they will starve to death. They are not Captain America. They have not been injected with genes. Nick Fury stood on the glass outside the infirmary and looked at Phil Coulson inside. His face could not be darker. He had already killed Carl. The confidentiality of information was raised to the highest level, so Phil Coulson didn't know about Carl, otherwise he wouldn't have stopped Carl directly and pulled a gun on him. In the eyes of Phil Coulson, Carl is just a shareholder of Stark Industries, and since his shareholding does not exceed 10%, he does not need to be too cautious. Even if he is a friend of Tony Stark, so what? Phil Coulson is a level 8 agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., how could he care about a shareholder, and from the information he knew, Carl was just an ordinary person, so there was naturally no threat. Nick Fury looked at his subordinates lying on the bed, even if their lives were in danger after a long time, and he became even more wary of Carl's unscrupulous attacks. He even began to think about whether Professor X's conditions were worth it. Like Carl, people who are not under control are the most threatening. Nick Fury glanced at Phil Coulson again and prepared to go find Carl. Since Carl had frozen it, he naturally had the means to unblock it. S.H.I.E.L.D's technology could naturally unblock Phil Coulson, but he was not the captain and was not as powerful as the captain. His physical constitution and genes, let alone 7 days, his vitality will decline after 3 days. After that, Nick drove alone to find Carl. Because he had called Carl before, he knew that Carl didn't like people to go to his house. If he really went to Carl's house, he would probably be beaten again, this time in Manhattan. A coffee shop. Why, what else does our director Nick need to trouble a little guy like me? Carl joked to Nick after he came to the coffee shop and sat down, without paying any attention to the people around him. He, Nick Fury, was here. How could there be ordinary people around? The cafe should be full of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. Phil Coulson has been frozen by you, Nick said to Carl with a dark face. Who is Phil Coulson? I don't know him. You don't know how to deal with porcelain, Carl said to Nick with an exaggerated expression, as if he didn't know anything. Unblock him and tell him your conditions. Nick immediately understood after seeing Carl like this that if he didn't shed some blood today, Carl probably wouldn't help. Let's get a ton of vibranium, Carl replied casually while drinking coffee. The reason why Carl dared to drink it was because even if it was poisonous, he could elementalize it, and then the poison would not work on him. Carl also recently found. S.H.I.E.L.D. is not that much, 30 kilograms at most. Nick looked at Carl with a black look on his face. He asked for a ton. He really thought that vibranium was a piece of cabbage. That stuff costs almost $100,000 per gram. It is still valuable. The kind without a city. 60 pounds, the minimum, otherwise there's no need to talk. Carl spoke out in a leisurely manner, not caring at all about Nick's cannibalistic look. Okay, unblock Phil Coulson now, Nick said through gritted teeth, resisting the thought of killing Carl with a shot. That won't work. You have to give it to me first before I can help him unblock it. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'll leave. Carl smiled symbolically at Nick, then stated his conditions, and after speaking Carl left, then walked into an alley and disappeared. An agent not far away reported the situation to Nick. After Nick returned to S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, he had a sullen face and asked someone to deliver 60 pounds of vibranium to Carl. Then he began to think about Carl's threat. Since it was not under control, it would be better to destroy it. He thought for a while and finally dialed Charles's number. At this moment, Carl appeared in the manor that Tony gave to him. This manor was located in a prime location in Manhattan and was worth more than $1 billion. Because Carl saved his life yesterday, the big dog transferred Obadiah's shares to after recycling, it has reached 65%. Naturally, it will not care about the manor for this little money. Carl took a look and saw that there were all kinds of facilities, including outdoor swimming pools, gyms, cinemas, esports rooms, bars, etc. Carl nodded with satisfaction and teleported away into the manor, returning directly to home in Queens. He planned to move Aunt May and others into the manor. After all, it was empty. What's more, as a shareholder of Stark Industries, living in the original house was not in line with his status, not to mention that the original house and rooms were not. It was very sufficient. Pilot always slept in the same room as Peter, and only Wanda had her own room. Chapter 41 I am Iron Man. Advertise here. Chapter 41. I am Iron Man. After Carl returned home to Queens and proposed to move to the manor in Manhattan, Peter, Wanda, and Pilot were all very excited and couldn't wait to run back to the room to pack their things. Only Aunt May was hesitant to speak. But seeing how excited they were, he didn't say anything. May, I know you feel like you depend on me for everything, but this is not your fault. Don't feel bad about it. What's mine is yours. You are my lover. May, let's go there together, okay? Peter over there, he can go to a high-level school to get a better education, and he can also have his own room. Wanda and Pilot can go too, okay? Carl walked to Aunt May and sat down, holding her hand. Said the hand gently. Okay. Aunt May thought for a while and then agreed. After all, he definitely wanted Peter to receive a better education, better resources and training, although she felt a little bit in her heart that she relied on Carl for everything, which made her a little embarrassed. But after Carl's gentle dissuasion and some consideration for Peter, Wanda, and Pilot, he still agreed. From now on, you can be the wife of the manor and manage the entire manor for me, okay? Carl teased Aunt May with a gentle smile. HMPH. I'm not the lady of the manor. I'm so embarrassed, dead man. I'm going to pack my things. Aunt May rolled her eyes at Carl and then turned around to pack her things. Carl was watching the news on the TV. It was Tony. News being interviewed. Tony Stark. Now, do you think we will believe that a bodyguard rescued you and wore Stark Industries' latest machine armor? It's simply ridiculous, a female reporter said to Tony while standing under the podium. Well, yes, that's right. After all, I have a lot of shortcomings, so, well, I'm not a hero. Tony glanced at the female reporter helplessly, and then held the manuscript in his hand. He read it, then thought for a while and said, "No, I think you misunderstood. I didn't say you were a hero, Mr. Stark. We want to know the truth about last night. After all, what you said is just official rhetoric and is not worthy of belief." The female reporter shook her head. Said to Tony, "And this is obviously a provocation." "Okay. I'm Iron Man." Tony put down the manuscript, thought for a while and then announced his identity to the camera. Wow, Mr. Stark. Mr. Stark, what did you do yesterday?" Carl looked at Tony on the news and couldn't help but smile. He was still so stinky. Then suddenly there was an engine roar outside the back door. Carl walked out of the door in confusion. He just happened to see Tony running out and parked in front of him, and there was also a Rolls-Royce behind, driven by Happy. And as soon as Tony got out of the car, he asked Happy to move the contents of the trunk into the house where Carl was. After hearing what the boss said, Happy naturally had no choice but to open the trunk and move the various gift boxes and packaging bags inside into the house. What are those things, Tony? Carl said to Tony, a little confused. Hey, those are all things for Wanda and Pilot, a small compensation, some brand name bags and game consoles, etc. Tony walked up to Carl and said with a smile. Wanda is only 10 years old, you give her a brand name bag. Are you okay, Tony? Carl said, looking at Tony suspiciously. What? She's only 10 years old, but she doesn't look like it. I always feel like she's 12 to 13 years old, so I gave her a bag and cosmetics. It's okay. I'll keep them for later. Tony took off his sunglasses in surprise and said. Carl said. Okay, you just happen to be here. I'm getting ready to move now. Come and help me. I just don't have enough cars. Carl said after watching the corner of Tony's mouth twitching, and led Tony into the living room, while Wanda and Pilot and Peter have packed their things and are already in the living room. Hey, Wanda, Pilot, these are given to you, consider them as a little compensation from me, and I have set up a relief foundation with 10 billion, and this relief foundation will give away all the funds. To every Sokovia person in need of help, I definitely apologize for what happened to you. Tony walked up to Wanda and Pilot and said sincerely, and even bowed to them at the end. Wanda and Pilot looked at Carl at a loss, and Carl nodded to them. After accepting Tony's apology, Wanda and Pilot began to look through the gifts that Tony brought them, and Tony looked through the pile of gifts. Taking out one and handing it to Peter, Carl looked at Tony a little surprised, but he didn't expect this wealthy businessman to be quite attentive. Part of the reason why Tony apologized to Wanda and Pilot was because those weapons did come from Stark Industries, but it didn't make the chairman of Stark Industries bow and apologize in front of two 10-year-old children. After all, the weapons caused by Stark Industries, there are so many injuries, why don't you see Tony apologizing to them? Even Yingsen's hometown is because of Stark Industries weapons, why don't you see Tony apologizing to those refugees? All this is because of Carl. Not to mention that Carl is his friend, but also because Carl is powerful. Tony wants to make good friends and deepen their relationship, so he will naturally do this. After all, a bow and some gifts are not enough. Not worth mentioning, that's why Tony was so kind to Wanda and Pilot, and even sincerely apologized and bowed to them. Okay, let's go. After packing up. After Carl saw Aunt May walking out with a box, he stepped forward to help Aunt May carry it and greeted everyone. Then Happy had to put away the things he had just moved out to the trunk and had to carry things for three little guys. Aunt May and Carl were in a Lamborghini, Wanda, Pilot, Peter, and Happy were in a Rolls-Royce driven by Happy, while Tony was driving alone. Then the three cars drove to the manor that Tony gave to Carl. Neighbors also came out of the house one after another and saw Aunt May and her family leaving in a luxury car. Some even saw the figure of Iron Man, Tony Stark. After Tony, Carl and others arrived at the manor, they saw that Carl and the others wanted to pack their luggage, so they took Happy back. Later, S.H.I.E.L.D also sent 60 kilograms of vibranium. After that, Carl took Phil Coulson and several others in S.H.I.E.L.D's car. An agent lifted the ice. After that, the S.H.I.E.L.D people left. After Carl returned to the manor, he checked around and found that the security and monitoring facilities were not comprehensive enough, so he planned to recruit a few capable people to act as security personnel. Chapter 42 Carl Rage. Advertise here. Chapter 42. Carl Rage. After talking to Charles on the phone, Nick Fury finally breathed a sigh of relief, because Charles had agreed to take action, but he had to change mutants' current situation, but Nick Fury had no intention of helping them at all, he just wanted to use his hands empty-handed White Wolf. After all, let alone the World Security Council, even the American congressman and the president would not agree, so this is simply impossible. Even if Charles knows, what can he do? Because S.H.I.E.L.D has developed psychic defense devices a long time ago, but due to the scarcity of them, only a few senior executives including Nick Fury wear them, and he knows that Charles does not dare to use the brainwave amplifier frequently, otherwise he will become an idiot faster. The brainwave amplifier will cause Charles's brain to overload. If used continuously, it will cause brain damage and turn him into an idiot. As long as he takes action against Carl, even if Charles finds out about Nick, he won't be afraid. He has already identified Charles's character. He can't start a war between mutants and humans because of this, not to mention that there is no shortage of things to do now. Major research laboratories are constantly catching mutants for research, and mutants headed by Magneto launch terrorist attacks everywhere. Now even the people don't like mutant, let alone change, but what he doesn't know is that Nick thought he had tricked him into becoming Charles, but Charles had already known through the brainwave amplifier that mutants' current situation was not Nick Fury's alone. Can be changed. This is because he did this when Nick Fury came to see him last time. He found that many congressmen and even senior officials were full of malice towards mutant. How could Nick Fury change it alone? At the same time, he also guessed that Nick Fury planned to use his hands empty-handed. He thought about it and then prepared to invade Carl's mind. But as soon as he entered Carl's mind, he found that it was protected by a hard barrier. He could not invade at all. When Carl on the other side was invaded by Charles, the system immediately alerted Carl and activated the defense. Open black lens bracket ding. Someone attempts to invade the host's mind and read the memory, and the system defense is automatically activated. Close black lens bracket. Carl was quite excited at first. After all, he thought he could sign in again, but after the system voice fell, Carl's face turned scary and gloomy, and then a large number of shadow ninjas appeared around him, and they spread out outside the manor and began to explore. Is there anyone around? After the information fed back by the black shadow ninja, the veins on Carl's forehead swelled. He already knows who it is. After all, there are many people with psychic abilities in the Marvel world. There are even several in Mutant, including the White Queen of Hellfire Club and Charles of Xavier Academy for Gifted Youngsters. But only Charles had a brainwave amplifier and could invade other people's minds remotely. Carl was furious at the moment, and then Peter suddenly walked up to him and said to Carl stiffly, "Mr. Carl, I am the director of Xavier Academy for Gifted Youth, Charles, you are looking for death." Before Charles could finish speaking, Carl directly used the freezing ability to freeze Peter and roared at Charles. Then the Shadow Ninja instantly brought Aunt May, Wanda, and Pilot to Carl. Carl didn't say anything and immediately freeze them all. Although freezing can kill people, it can also save people. After reaching a certain temperature, the person's blood, organs, and all will be frozen, and it can be maintained for a long time, putting people in a state of suspended animation. The reason why Carl did this was to protect them from being controlled by Charles. After bringing the four of them into the world of shadow, Carl disappeared and appeared in Tony's underground studio the next moment, and Tony saw Carl's sudden arrival. A little surprised, he immediately said, "What's wrong, Carl? Don't you have to sort things out? Why did you come to me all of a sudden? Could you?" Charles on the other side saw through Peter that Carl was so decisive in freezing the people under his control, and even said angrily to him, and he found that all the people in the house where Carl was located had disappeared, and he couldn't sense it anymore. After all, it was dark. The shadow world belongs to another latitude, so naturally he cannot sense it. Then he took off his helmet and said to Jean Grey next to him, "Chin, let them get ready. It seems that I have provoked a strong man for the academy." "What? Who is he?" Chin looked at Charles in confusion and said, "He is the shareholder of Stark Industries, Carl Augustin Chong, and is also Iron Man, Tony Stark's friend, and the person that S.H.I.E.L.D. wanted me to deal with. I tried to invade his mind, but failed and made him angry. He should come to Xavier Academy for Gifted Youngsters soon." Charles sighed and said, "This." Chin didn't know what to say after hearing what Charles said. After all, he was the director of Stark Industries, and even a friend of Tony Stark. Tony Stark stood up to resist Mutant, not even it requires the support of major media, and the pressure of public opinion will directly make Mutant's situation more difficult. You must know that after Tony Stark publicly revealed that he was Iron Man, Stark Industries stock skyrocketed, and Tony Stark was reported on the streets. His fans are almost everywhere, and Stark Industries is one of the major consortiums in America. 1. Don't underestimate these consortia. If Tony Stark takes the lead in organizing a consortium to resist mutants, then major laboratories will be more unscrupulous in arresting mutants for research, and may even directly cause a war between ordinary people and mutants. This consequence of course Charles knew, but now that it had happened, he had no choice but to accept it. He also regretted very much at this moment that he had used the power of his mind on Carl, and when the invasion failed, he also invaded his side and tried to talk to him, causing Carl to rage. Charles from Mutant Academy just tried to invade my mind, but failed. He invaded Peter's mind and wanted to talk to me. I froze Peter, May, Wanda, and Pilot, and put them in the world of shadows. I'm going to make trouble for Mutant now, are you going to go? After Carl appeared in Tony's underground studio, he ignored Tony's teasing and said to Tony with a sullen face, "Okay, wait for me, the two of us are not enough." Tony also put away his smile after listening to Carl's words, and then replied solemnly. And after saying that, he operated on the computer. Soon after, several armed helicopters fell from the sky, and they were the most advanced ones from Stark Industries. They were also equipped with Stark Industries' most advanced missiles and were controlled by JARVIS. Chapter 43 Killing Towards Mutant Academy. Advertise here. Chapter 43 Killing Towards Mutant Academy. Then Tony started to put on the steel battle suit. Carl looked at the several advanced armed helicopters on the display screen. Carl suddenly thought of something. After Tony finished putting on the steel battle suit, Carl slowly spoke. "Tony, do you still have the Jericho missiles? Take out all your weapons and I'll let the Black Shadow Ninja use them." "Oh shit, it looks like Mutant Academy is in trouble. Come on, the remaining weapons from Stark Industries are in a factory. Come with me." Tony heard Carl's words and even imagined the scene in his mind, and then started the battle suit, flew towards a large factory in Stark Industries, with Carl following closely behind, while JARVIS controlled 4 armed helicopters following behind. A few minutes later, Tony took Carl to a large factory. After entering and turning on the power, a large number of weapons appeared in front of Carl. There were all kinds of weapons, and they were all active weapons of the US military. Even Jericho, there are hundreds of boxes of missiles, GPS, machine guns, Gatling, small missiles, mortars, etc. The weapons are almost piled up in the entire large factory. They're all here. If you can take them, you can take them all. Anyway, now that Stark Industry has transformed, there's no use keeping this thing here. Tony opened his mask as he walked and said to Carl behind him. Thank you, Tony. Carl looked at Tony deeply, because Tony himself had to bear a lot of pressure to deal with Mutant, not to mention that Tony decided to help just because of Carl's words. From now on, Carl regarded Tony as he is a true friend, but before he only regarded Tony as a favored friend. The two are definitely different. Oh shit, don't be so sensational, just hurry up and get it. I can't wait to see the expressions of those at Mutant Academy. Tony looked at Carl with an unbearable expression and urged him to hurry up, but the smile he wore betrayed his mood at the moment. Carl gave Tony a look, and then 1,005 shadow ninjas appeared around him, and began to move all the weapons in front of him into the world of shadow. 30 minutes later, the shadow ninjas moved all the weapons in the entire factory to the world of shadow. In the world, Carl conveyed the usage methods of various weapons to every shadow ninja through the Nia mask. Afterwards, Carl nodded to Tony. Then Tony's mask fell, his hands were facing the ground, and the injectors under his feet were activated. The whole person directly lifting into the air, a pair of ice crystal wings appeared behind Carl, and he took off with a vigorous wave. With the blessing of psychokinesis, they flew in the direction of Tony, and JARVIS activated the 4-armed helicopters. The propellers on them began to rotate, and then slowly took off. JARVIS controlled them to fly in the direction of Tony and Carl. And Tony knew the location of Xavier Academy for Gifted Youth through the location of JARVIS. That is, Mutant Academy, flying all the way with Carl, and on the other side. After Chin pushed Charles to the conference room, and now in the conference room was a member of the X-Men, Wolverine, Logan James Howlett, Cyclops, Scatter Summers, Storm, Aurora Monroe, Beast, Henry Philip McCoy, Steel, Peter Rasputian, and the new Iceman joining the X-Men, Robert Bobby Drake, Burning Man, Street, John Allardyce, and Shadowcat, Kitty Pryde. I accidentally offended a powerful man just now, and he is also a shareholder of Stark Industries and a friend of Tony Stark. He should be coming to us soon. You all must be prepared and not let the children of the Academy be harmed. Hurt, Charles said to the X-Men members in the conference room. Strong. I want to see how strong he is and whether he can withstand a fireball from me. Pyroman John said to everyone while playing with the lighter in his hand disdainfully. Tony Stark. That warmonger. So what if it's him? His steel battle suit is no different to me than scrap metal. Wolverine said to Charles with the same disdain, and the method was not worth Tony Stark's attention at all. And several bone claws suddenly stretched out from the back of his hand, with a look of eagerness on his face. Dean, you don't have to worry. If they dare to come, they will have to run back in despair, and we are not vegetarians. Cyclops said slowly. He did not say that Tony Stark and the others would be left behind. After all, he was not Logan. With John, he thought more, because if they were left here, the military would probably start tanks to surround the place tomorrow. After all, he was also the president of Stark Industries, even one of the largest chaebol in America. Although Charles owns shares in many companies and enterprises, he only receives money regularly and has no management authority. And even so, his assets cannot reach Tony Stark's net worth, let alone become one of the richest people in the entire America. Chaebol, because even congressmen sometimes need to look at Tony's face to act. Oh, well, I hope things get better this time. Charles sighed and said to everyone. Although he regretted offending Carl, he did not feel that using his psychic ability was a mistake. After all, he had been using his psychic ability for so many years. They all did this, how could he question his ability because of Carl? At this time, a sonic boom suddenly appeared outside. Boom. Tony arrives at Xavier Academy for young talents wearing a steel battle suit. Carl followed closely and landed from the sky, followed by 4-armed helicopters, full of Stark Industries advanced missiles. The bomb was the most powerful one. The reason why he didn't bring anyone else with him was to prevent them from being controlled by Charles. As for Tony, Carl didn't believe that Charles dared to control Tony, otherwise he would have to wait for the full revenge of Stark Industries. Even if Tony raged, Carl didn't know what would happen. After all, controlling people's thoughts is very scary, and after he invades your mind, it is no less than the feeling of running naked on the street. Almost all secrets can be read by others at will. This is why the president and congressmen are afraid of Charles. Chapter 44 Fighting Mutants. Advertise here. Chapter 44 Fighting Mutant. The X-Men immediately rushed out of the conference room and rushed all the surrounding students back to the classroom. Then Charles was pushed by Chin and came among them. He looked at Carl and Tony in front of him and slowly said, Mr. Carl, I apologize to you for my behavior. There is no need for us to fight, and it is not me who really wants to deal with you. It's too late, Charles, when you wantonly entered my mind and failed to invade Peter's mind, this matter is so easy to solve. Carl said to Charles indifferently, and after he finished speaking, people appeared around him. There are a large number of shadow ninjas, and the difference is that they all hold weapons from Stark Industries. Some were carrying an RPG, some were carrying Gatling, some were holding small missile launchers, and there were even 3 Shadow Ninjas pushing Jericho missile launchers at Charles and others, and 1,500 the Black Shadow Ninjas almost directly surrounded Xavier Youth Genius Academy, and not all weapons were aimed at Charles and the others. Some Black Shadow Ninjas even aimed their weapons directly at the little mutant in the classroom. Walt, wait, I think we should be able to talk. Shin immediately walked out from behind Charles and said to Carl and Tony. It would be fine if these weapons were pointed at them, but many of these weapons were aiming at the little mutant in the classroom. If a fight starts, the little mutant will be dead in a short while. Even Wolverine Logan and Cyclops Scatter's expressions were not good looking. They didn't expect that the other party would be so cruel and even prepared to attack indiscriminately. Tony glanced at Carl in surprise, but didn't say anything. He knew what Carl was like. Once you reach his bottom line, he won't care about you, adults or children. Pyro John looked at Carl and Tony with an unhappy expression. He began to move slowly to one side. He was going to sneak attack Carl from the side and then take him down directly. In this way, he would save the entire academy. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but get excited, and slowly moved to the right side of Carl. Oh, talk about what? Phoenix, it hasn't come out yet, why are you talking to me? The moment Charles dares to invade my mind, we have no need to talk. Carl looked at Shin indifferently and said, and directly told her true identity, and even the Phoenix force in her body. Shin and Charles looked at Carl in disbelief. After all, few people in the academy even knew about taking things, and now Carl actually said it casually. Just say it. Boom. Pyro John thought he would throw a fireball at Carl when he wasn't paying attention, but he didn't notice that Carl slightly raised the corners of his mouth when he saw this, and then used psychokinesis to control the fireball he threw back to him. He had already discovered it. John, after all, when he first watched X-Men, he still remembered the whole traitor very well. After all, you grew up in Xavier Academy, but you actually ran away with Magneto, which is a wolfish look. Boom. And when Carl noticed John moving to his right, he knew what John wanted to do. Just as he thought, it happened too suddenly. After Tony reacted, he immediately launched an attack on Charles and others, rising into the air. After that, he fired the palm cannon at Charles and others. Steel immediately stood in front of Charles and the others, and Cyclops immediately pushed Charles back. Wolverine, Iceman, Steel, Storm, and Shadowcat also began to attack Tony and Carl. Only Chin looked at them anxiously. She was at a loss, she couldn't keep using her ability, otherwise the things sealed by Charles in her body would escape, so she could only worry. After Carl threw John's fireball back to himself, he directly knocked John away. Carl smiled disdainfully, and a sentence flashed in his mind. A good guy who also loves to play. All the Dark Shadow Ninjas launched attacks through the Nigga mask, and then all kinds of weapons were fired at Xavier Youth Genius Academy, and they were still attacking indiscriminately. Even the little mutant also had several missiles fired at it. Seeing this, Chin could only activate her ability to control these missiles and throw them into an empty building. Carl just smiled when he saw this, and then continued to attack Wolverine and others. After all, there are a large number of weapons in the Shadow world. He didn't believe that Chin could always be in control. Boom. Carl condensed an Eastern dragon made of ice and fell from the sky, hitting Logan and Bobby directly. Logan was fine, but Iceman Bobby was in terrible condition and could hardly move. Even though his ability is to control ice, it is far less powerful than Carl, and there is no such thing as elementalization. After Logan got up, he jumped up and pounced on Carl like a normal person. Carl looked at his behavior and couldn't help but smile. Then a suspicious red light flashed in his eyes, and then he used Cyclops on Logan. When Logan saw this, he was shocked. How could he shoot lasers from both eyes? Isn't that the ability of Cyclops? Before he could think about it, 2 red lasers shot out from Carl's eyes, hitting Logan directly and shooting him to the ground. Carl continued to shoot at him relentlessly. He wanted to see if Logan directly used after the laser burn is gone, can his healing factor be restored. After Cyclops Scat pushed Charles out of the room, he happened to see Storm, Steel and Shadowcat attacking Tony Stark, while Beast was moving the little mutant in the classroom, and Chin used his ability to control the missiles shot by the Black Ninjas. Missiles and rocket launchers, Iceman Bobby and Pyroman John were paralyzed on the ground, not knowing whether to live or die. Logan was continuously shot on the ground by Carl with Cyclops, and Logan's wails were heard. He immediately turned the switch on his eye and shot directly at Carl with full power, piercing Carl's body almost instantly. Tony saw after the petition, he shouted. Carl, okay Tony, I'm fine, don't be so nervous, he can't kill me. Carl said to Tony with a smile, and then Tony saw that Carl's body was actually ice. It is still healing and will be fine in a short while. Apart from the damaged clothes, there are no traces of injury at all. My God, Carl, are you a human being? This is simply unscientific, Tony exclaimed as he looked at Carl's wounds. The face in the steel battle suit was full of disbelief. After all, no one is made of ice. It can even heal. Okay, Tony, we'll talk about this later. Let them pay some price first. Carl said to Tony calmly. Chapter 45 Mutant Academy Defeat. Advertise here. Chapter 45. Mutant Academy Defeat. Okay, Okay, JARVIS, launch the attack. Tony ordered JARVIS after hearing what Carl said, and then 4 armed helicopters hovering in the sky launched an attack on the entire academy, and then launched missiles from the beginning. It even hit their teaching building. The movement here naturally alerted the surrounding police, and even other government departments. S.H.I.E.L.D. directly used the satellite to call up the picture to watch. Nick Fury looked at Carl and Tony in the picture, and he did not expect that Carl actually took Tony directly to the mutant academy, even using missiles. Many members of the government got the news, but after hearing Tony Stark's name, they reported it to the person in the Black Palace. After all, Tony Stark's identity is not that simple. The hearings in the timeline are all after receiving orders and support from many powerful generals. The congressman dared to ask Tony to hand over the steel battle suit in public, otherwise why would he? This time Carl opened fire directly, and the surrounding temperature immediately began to drop, and even ice crystals floated in the sky. These ice crystals are ice crystals formed when water molecules in the air encounter low temperatures, and a large number of ice cones appeared behind Carl. Each one they are all the same file size as a truck, and he controls the ice pick to attack Cyclops, Wolverine, Storm, Steel, and Shadowcat. They watched huge amounts of ice picks coming towards them. Cyclops used his ability to defeat the ice picks. Wolverine could only dodge. His bone claws were not even as hard as ice. He did not dare to confront the ice picks head-on. Storm controlled them. Storm attacked the incoming ice cone, while Steel rushed towards the ice cone without any fear and collided with it. Boom. Shadowcat used his ability to go directly through the ice picks. Before they could take a breath, another wave of ice picks struck again. Carl watched all this indifferently, and his hair turned black and blue. It's particularly spooky, and because JARVIS controls the gunship to launch missiles. This made Shin a little unable to hold on. Although there were several little mutants with psychokinesis powers to help her, it was still a drop in the bucket. Under the bombing of the shadow ninjas and armed helicopters, many little mutants were killed and injured, and the weaker mutants or even die directly. Mutant, who only has physical powers, barely survived the aftermath of the missile. A blue light flashed in Carl's eyes, and Wolverine Logan was directly frozen. Carl used the lowest temperature he could mobilize to freeze Logan. Even though he would not die, he could not move. He turned to Cyclops Scatter, with a red light flashing in his eyes. Carl accompanied psychokinesis and shot Scatter with Cyclops. Seeing this, Scat also put his hand on the right side of his glasses, and then turned on the full power. At the same time, a red laser and Carl's 2 lasers were fired at each other. However, because Carl had psychokinesis, Skater's laser was the laser shot by Carl forced him back, and even Scatter could barely hold on. Taking advantage of the victory, Carl followed up and waved his right hand at Scat. Several large ice picks flew towards Scat and hit him. When he hit him, he could no longer hold on. Carl's laser hit him directly. Blast on him and penetrate his body. Then he collapsed on the ground and didn't know whether to live or die. Carl appeared behind Storm Aurora the next moment, and then directly turned on the elementalization. The thunder and storm she controlled had no effect on him at all. Carl pinched Aurora's neck with one hand and injected it into her body. With a lot of freezing power, her neck was already covered by Carl's ice. Just as Shadowcat was about to rush over, he was knocked away from the side by a blue ice block condensed by Carl, and fell to the ground. Carl walked slowly to her, looked at her coldly, and then penetrated her with an ice sword. Belly, and then pinned her to the ground. After all, her ability was so abnormal that she could actually penetrate objects in the form of molecules. Give her some time and she could save everyone. Now, naturally, she has to guard against her. Tony also slowly landed next to Carl. After that, his battle suit was all covered with black marks, all of which were struck by lightning controlled by Aurora. Steel not far away saw this and ran towards Carl. His whole body was made of steel, and even the ground shook when he ran. He wanted to use his impact force to deal with Carl. Carl just glanced at him, and then all the way he moved forward turned into ice and was extremely slippery. Unfortunately, Steel slipped and fell, and the impact naturally disappeared. Then a blue light flashed in Carl's eyes. Steel it was also frozen and was as big as a truck. Carl grabbed Aurora's neck and walked towards the teaching building in front. Just now, Scatter was pushing Charles towards this direction. After that, the black shadow ninjas around him disappeared and appeared behind Carl the next moment. 1,500 black shadow ninjas, holding rocket launchers in their hands, followed Carl and Tony, making it look like Carl and Tony were just gang members. Shin collapsed on the steps in front of the teaching building. Overuse of ability had already made it impossible for her to hold on. Not to mention that even without the Phoenix Force in the body, controlling psychokinesis is very exhausting. She will naturally feel very tired if she uses it too much. Carl glanced at her lightly. He didn't intend to do anything to Shin. It would be interesting if Phoenix was accidentally released. He can't defeat Phoenix now. He will have to finish the game if he eliminates one material molecule. The situation in the original timeline would have been if Wolverine hadn't eliminated the material molecules and killed Shin. It is estimated that the entire Earth will have to be played. Definitely, this is also the interference of Shin's first personality, and where is the mutant universe? There are no great gods such as Ancient One and Odin. Now that the Phoenix comes out, it is estimated that it will not be able to destroy the Earth. The Ancient One will definitely take action, but I don't know which one is more powerful, Time Gem or the defensive Phoenix Force. Besides, Odin probably won't be able to do it. After all, the Earth is the 9 major powers he rules. One of the kingdoms, although with the existence of Sorcerer Supreme, he rarely interferes with the Earth. But the Earth is still nominally ruled by Asgard, but except for magicians, the people on Earth don't know it at all. Carl carried Aurora past Shin. Before he could find Charles, he saw Charles himself moving out in a wheelchair. He looked around, sighed, and said to Carl. Mr. Carl, you have vented enough now. If you still feel it is not enough, I will give you my life, but please let Aurora go. They don't know anything. Or you can ask your conditions of. Chapter 46 Carl's Conditions. Advertise here. Chapter 46. Carl's Conditions. Carl looked at Charles with a sneer. Why would he have done it in the first place if he had known this? Then Carl thought about what conditions he should put forward. After all, if it is unrealistic to kill Charles, he might be able to die, but he cannot die in Carl's hands, because Charles's death caused Shin to collapse, and her second personality broke free from the spiritual cage woven by Charles. Not to mention that Charles still has some prestige in Mutant, and even Magneto is his good friend. Even though the two of them are against each other every day, if Charles really dies in the hands of Carl, then Magneto will definitely find trouble with Carl. So it's better to get some benefits. I want the mutant genes of everyone in your laboratory, including your own, and what the sentence you said before means. Carl narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Charles and said slowly. After all, what he said, it's not me who really wants to deal with you, which makes Carl very confused. Oh, okay, I promise you, I will send all the genes later, because it is not me who really wants to deal with you, but S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury contacted me before and asked me to take action against you, so I pretended I agreed, and I also knew that he was going to be a free hand, so I. Charles sighed and said to Carl, and agreed to his conditions. Nick Fury, I know, now give me the genes. Carl sneered after hearing the names of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury, and then said to Charles. Wait a moment. Charles said to Carl and closed his eyes. Carl felt a mental wave coming from Charles, but it was not towards Carl and Tony, but towards the underground of the teaching building. Because Beast and most of the students have already entered the place where their X-Men usually train, and it can even defend against nuclear warheads. With Charles's financial resources, it is not unusual to own such a place, not to mention that this is Mutant Academy. Soon Beast McCoy came to Charles carrying a metal box and placed the box in front of Carl and Tony. Carl used psychokinesis to open the box, and controlled the test tube inside to levitate in front of him. After looking at the labels on the test tube, and realizing that several key people were there, Carl put the test tube back into the box, and then used psychokinesis to control the box to levitate. By his side, he walked out with Tony. When he led Tony past Shin, he didn't notice a red light flashing in Shin's eyes. After arriving at the open space, Tony activated the battle suit and flew towards his mansion, and ice crystal wings appeared behind Carl, took him away, and all the shadow ninjas around him disappeared. Only 2 of Tony's 4 armed helicopters were left, and they also left with Carl and Tony. Even the wreckage of the helicopter was taken away by Carl using the Black Shadow Ninja. After Tony and Carl left, Charles finally breathed a sigh of relief. At this moment, the Xavier Academy for Young Talents was almost in ruins. Only the teaching building was still standing, and the other buildings almost all were destroyed. After all, after being attacked by various missiles, rocket launchers, Gatling, and mortars, it is difficult not to turn into ruins. Although there are many mutants in the academy, most of them are just children. Even if they are a little older, they have not experienced combat and training. I don't know what to do when encountering this kind of thing. Anyone who can escape by himself is considered very good. Most of them were sent here because their families didn't want to see them or their parents. Some of them were picked up by the X-Men, but they were just children with some abilities and could not form combat capabilities at all. Charles used his psychic abilities to move some of the age groups in the training room. The older students yelled and helped take Logan and the others to the infirmary. Although Logan was frozen and would not die, he could not come out because in addition to his super self-healing ability, his strength and speed were comparable to other mutants. Then, not great. Boom. Steel broke free from the ice, looked around, and found that Carl and Tony were no longer there. The students from the college were helping to bring the injured to the infirmary for rescue. Seeing this, he also. Nick Fury stepped forward to help, and Nick Fury saw the entire scene from the satellite. Because there was no sound, he didn't know what Carl and Charles said, but he could guess a thing or two. After Carl and Tony returned to his mansion, Tony looked at all the missed calls on his phone and said to Carl helplessly. Here comes my trouble. Look, there are a lot of missed calls. I guess the government will have to hold me accountable. After all, weapons of mass destruction are being used within the country, and not just once. Thanks, Tony, call me if you need anything later. I'm leaving, Carl said to Tony calmly, and after leaving a word, he left with the genes he got from Charles, and incorporate genes into your own system space. Oh shit, I still have to clean up this mess, you are such a bastard. Tony cursed in the direction Carl left, but the corners of his mouth raised slightly to show that he was in a good mood now, after all. Carl's words proved that his work was not in vain. Then Tony began to contact his good brother Rod and began to deal with the follow-up of the matter. After Carl returned home, he brought Aunt May, Wanda, Pilot, and Peter out of the shadow world, and lifted their ice to allow them to recover from suspended animation, while Aunt May and others were. After Carl lifted the lockdown, he immediately crossed his arms because it was too cold. What happened to Carl? Why did you suddenly freeze us all? Aunt May said to Carl, a little confused. She knew Carl. If it was not an emergency, he would not freeze them directly. Something must have happened. Matter. Even Wanda looked at Carl angrily, Peter rubbed his head, and Pilot shrank into the sofa and looked at Carl. There was a mutant who tried to invade my mind with psychic ability before, but after he failed, he invaded Peter's mind and tried to talk to me. I first froze Peter and then you, just to prevent him from controlling you. Now I've solved it, it's okay, you can go take a hot bath. Carl looked at Aunt May tenderly and said to her. Chapter 47 Hearing. Advertise here. Chapter 47. Hearing. After Carl finished speaking, Wanda, Peter, and Pilot immediately ran away because it was too cold. Aunt May walked up to Carl and hugged him. She knew that the solution Carl said was not easy. After all, the ability to control people's minds, so easy as Carl said. Okay, it's okay. You go take a shower first. There are enough rooms in the manor, otherwise you have to wait in line. Carl said softly to Aunt May, and patted her back gently with his hand. Auntie looked at Carl affectionately and then walked upstairs. Carl was sitting alone on the sofa. He thought about whether to kill Braised Egg. After all, this incident was all caused by Braised Egg. Although he also obtained the mutant genes of Charles and others, which even contained Magneto's genes, Carl was still very unhappy. That Braised Egg always feels that he can only be at peace after he dies. Then he counted the things in his hands, including 3 fairy beans, 1 woodcutter's fountain, the spider serum formula, and the major mutant genes. Carl thought about what to do next. Should he complete the genetic research first, or get the brine first? Eggman, Carl feels that he can't just let it go this time, even if he has Captain Marvel's quantum pager, he must teach him a lesson, otherwise he will keep plotting against him. After he was no longer as powerful as Captain Marvel or signed some cards, after completely killing Braised Eggman, Carl summoned the Black Shadow Ninja and asked him to come out with a time bomb. Even if Carl set the time to 3 minutes, he would bring it with him. The time bomb came to the Potomac River between Washington and Virginia, and handed the time bomb to the Black Shadow Ninja. Afterwards, he used the Nega mask to convey the appearance of Nick Fury and asked him to send the bomb to him. After that, the Black Shadow Ninja disappeared in front of Carl, and Carl appeared in a big tree not far away, quietly watching the Black Shadow Ninja enter the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. He set a timer of 3 minutes, if it was within 3 minutes. The Black Shadow Ninja brings the bomb in front of Nick Fury, so if he can dodge it, then he will be lucky. If it blows up in front of him, then he deserves it. All this depends on when the Black Shadow Ninja finds him. If not, then the Black Shadow Ninja will directly bring the bomb and explode it in a place at the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. On the other side, Nick Fury was thinking about how to deal with Carl in the office. He suddenly saw a ninja in black appearing in front of his desk, holding a bomb and placing it on his desk, and then disappeared. Nick Fury looked at the remaining 5 seconds above and immediately ran towards the door. The moment he opened the door and closed it, the bomb exploded. Boom. Nick Fury was directly hit by the bomb's door and flew into the corridor, and the entire office exploded. At this moment, he only had a weak consciousness, and his whole ears were ringing. If he was at this moment. I'm still awake, so I probably want to curse, damn fuck. After Carl got the information feedback from the Nega mask about the Dark Ninja who had returned, he couldn't help but smile, because he knew that even if Nick Fury was not dead, he would probably be in bed for a while. Oh my god. Then Carl disappeared into the big tree, not caring whether Nick Fury was dead or not. After all, if he was killed so easily, he couldn't be called the king of agents. Director. Come quickly, take the director to the infirmary. After the explosion, Hill immediately discovered that it was Nick Fury's office, and then rushed over, just in time to see Nick being pressed against the door. Next, you must know that Nick Fury's office is specially reinforced, including the door, otherwise he would probably be dead. This is why the bomb did not blow up the door, but flew out due to the impact. On the other side, Tony received a summons from the court and stated that he needed to attend a hearing tomorrow. Tony naturally knew that this would come sooner or later. He knew from the time he announced that he was Iron Man how the government could fight against him. Suit is not interested. The Osborn group also learned that Tony would attend the hearing, and the purpose of the hearing was to get Tony to hand over the steel battle suit. After that, he immediately contacted the leaders of several other major companies and said this. We can be competitors or even business enemies, but if the government sets this precedent, will we be asked to hand over our things for the same reason in the future? We can't compromise. Tomorrow it will be Tony Stark, and the day after tomorrow will be Tony Stark. It could be you or me. I agree with Norman Osborn. I agree, we can't set a precedent like this. I will be there tomorrow. Agree. The next day Tony attended the hearing truthfully. Mr. Stark, do you have a special weapon with special properties? It can even threaten the security of the country, so please hand over this weapon. A senator said to Tony below. I don't. You don't have one, so what is a steel battle suit? Then it depends on how you define a weapon. For example, is it a high-tech mechanical prosthesis? No, it is a weapon. You must turn it in for the sake of the country's stability. And we are not weapons experts. We have invited real weapons experts, as well as Lieutenant Colonel Rhodes. The senator said to the audience. Everyone said. And Tony didn't expect that they actually found Rhodes. After that, they asked Rhodes to read a paragraph, and then Justin Hammer spoke. After that, Tony connected to the display screen, and then there were a few operations, and then he called up Han. Hammer Industries' robot experiment video, and bluntly stated that it would take at least 20 years for the country to surpass his technology, while Hammer Industries would need at least 40 years. After saying that, he walked away. The angry senator ignored the media and said to Tony, FK Tony. Tony didn't care at all, and blew a kiss to him, and then left the hearing. Norman Osborn and others did not expect that Tony Stark would end so easily. They thought they would have to put pressure on the government together. After all, several the pressure exerted by big super companies on the government will have a huge impact on America's economy. Even if the stock market is turbulent, then someone on Wall Street is expected to jump off the building. After Tony returned home, he continued to study the battle suit. General Ross helped him solve the mutant matter before, but he also gave General Ross several sonic weapons. They were still large sonic weapons, which were more powerful than Obadiah's before. It's too much. Although he doesn't know what he wants this for, Tony doesn't want to care about it. Chapter 48 Carl's Plan. Advertise here. Chapter 48. Carl's Plan. After returning home in the past few days, Carl has been thinking about the biologists in Marvel who have superior intelligence and have the opportunity to conquer them. Tony told him that the previous matter had been solved after he gave General Lee Ross several sonic weapons. Because the military does not like mutants, and there is William Stryker who specializes in capturing mutants for research, and they hate mutants deeply. As for Tony's attack on Mutant Academy, the military will not pursue too much. Even some congressmen may just publicize Tony's use of weapons of mass destruction in the media, and Ross can easily handle all this, because those even if members of Congress are seeking votes for themselves. But he wouldn't offend a powerful general for this. After Carl found out, he suddenly thought that Bruce Banner's girlfriend also seemed to have a PhD in biology, and that Mr. Lan, who had been in contact with Banner, was also a master of biology, and even the Hulks after he was knocked away by the abomination. The blood dripped onto the wound on his head, and he even seemed to have turned into a big boss. His IQ has improved a lot, and he seems to have awakened his powers, but some of the information behind Carl is not very clear, and this Mr. Blue may be able to subdue him. Carl touched it and thought about it after get off work, and it seems that Banner has always been S.H.I.E.L.D. Monitoring. After Carl thought of S.H.I.E.L.D., he couldn't help but think of himself blowing up Nick Fury's office and even almost killing him. He couldn't help but smile. Naturally, Carl couldn't kill Nick Fury, even if he had Captain Marvel's pager. After all, no one knows what his backhand is. If Nick kills him with his front foot, the quantum pager on his back foot sends a signal to Captain Marvel in the universe. That would not be fun. After all, there are a lot of black technologies in Marvel. Even Nick Fury faked his death once in the timeline, not to mention that Nick Fury is now the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., and this organization is affiliated with the World Security Council. If he gets Nick Fury if he died, wouldn't he be directly an enemy of several major countries in the world, and S.H.I.E.L.D. often acts in America, not to mention that America can almost be said to be the financial backer of S.H.I.E.L.D. Killing Nick Fury is equivalent to making the entire America an enemy. Even if he can kill him without anyone noticing, in Marvel, where black technology is everywhere, he may be exposed after all, and Carl also wants Nick Fury to organize. As for the Avengers, who else will resist the interstellar invasion in the near future? Carl doesn't want to be a hero. He just wants to fish in troubled waters and get rid of the Tesseract and Loki's scepter. Although I'm not sure if it will be useful to me now, I want to get it first, not to mention how to know if I don't try. And being a hero is easy to be attacked by villains. Tony even had his house bombed directly later, and even Pepper was being kidnapped. Thor is in Asgard, Black Widow has no family, Hawkeye's family doesn't even know where the Avengers are, and they took them there later. Banner has no family, not to mention no one would want to mess with him, and Captain America is also alone. Only Tony has been attacked, so being a hero comes with a price. And there must be someone in front to attract the attention of the government, the people, and others, so that Carl can fish in troubled waters and get more benefits, but Carl himself cannot form the Avengers. Isn't it just right for Nick Fury to do it while he still has it? Life, you can still use it. So all things considered, Nick Fury cannot die. Even if he blows him up, he has to hold in his breath. Otherwise, unless he tricks Captain Marvel or Hulk to catch him, it will be in vain. And Nick Fury has no absolute, he wouldn't take action at all until he was sure. Even if he digs out Captain America, he can't deal with him. The Black Shadow Ninja can kill Captain America. After all, a person's energy is limited. Even if Captain America says I can fight with you for a day, it depends on what you encounter. What kind of opponent is that? Not to mention that the shadow ninjas will resurrect from the shadow world after they die. They can fight you for a year. He wouldn't even say that Carl had bombed him. There was little point in saying it when he wasn't absolutely sure how to deal with him, and he also understood that this was Carl's warning, and it was also a way to deal with Charles. Carl's warning. ... Carl has been staying at home these days, and by the way, he posted information on recruiting housekeepers and servants on the internet. After all, Aunt May can't do everything by herself. This manor is so big, wouldn't Aunt May be exhausted? Since she has money, if she had to enjoy herself, she might as well let Aunt May be her lady of the manor instead of having to do housework. Naturally, there were a lot of people applying for the job. You must know that Carl's official identity is that he is a shareholder of Stark Industries and is even a good friend of Tony Stark. Moreover, the salary offered by Carl is higher than the average salary on the market. Naturally, they are attracted. Many capable people came for the interview. Carl found several interesting people inside: Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, and even Yelena from the Red House, Natasha Romanoff's sister, but Natasha Romanoff didn't seem to recognize her sister, and Carl also I felt a mutant, but I couldn't feel any of her powers. Because Carl had trained psychokinesis before, his mental power had also increased a lot, so he could feel something different. Carl looked at the blonde beauty with big waves in front of him and was lost in thought. A name suddenly flashed in his mind: Mystique, Raven Wagner. She is the woman who can take on the appearance of anyone, and even her pupils and fingerprints are the same. Thinking of this, Carl couldn't help but reveal a playful smile. In Carl's impression, Raven had always been by Magneto's side. Why did he suddenly come to his place? Carl was not surprised when S.H.I.E.L.D's Black Widow arrived. After all, according to Nick Fury's urine, he would definitely try every means to monitor him. The Red Room probably wanted to control Carl for their use, because Carl was here. The strength of Xavier Youth Talent Academy has been noticed by many organizations. There is another thing that Carl can't figure out. HYDRA hasn't responded yet, which is a bit abnormal. According to Carl's understanding of them, shouldn't HYDRA have sent someone to visit them a long time ago, or maybe the Winter Soldier has come to give gifts? Chapter 49 Mystique, Raven. Advertise here. Chapter 49. Mystique, Raven. Okay, congratulations Ms. Green, you are admitted. You can move your luggage here after this afternoon. Carl said to the changed woman Mystique, while Natasha Romanoff and Yelena showed disappointed expressions. They didn't use their real names, but Carl knew their true identities. Okay, thank you boss, I will definitely take care of your manor. Green said excitedly to Carl, and decided to move here immediately, and then left. Natasha Romanoff and Yelena also left together. Natasha Romanoff and Yelena naturally felt that something was wrong with each other, but they left tacitly because Yelena had changed her appearance, and Natasha Romanoff had long thought she was dead and did not recognize her at all. Not to mention that so much time had passed. After they left, Carl looked at the place where they were standing. Then psychokinesis started. After a while, several monitors flew out from the ground under the table. Carl had a real and emotional expression. As expected, they all came out of the Red Room, and then used psychokinesis to destroy the two monitors. As for why Carl chose Mystique, there was a reason. He wanted to see what Magneto did when he sent Mystique. What was his purpose, or did Raven come here on her own to assassinate him? Carl didn't think she had that strength. Raven's mutant gene could only delay her aging at best. Apart from changing her body shape, her physical fitness was almost the same as that of ordinary people. Carl shook his head and smiled, without thinking too much. As long as Raven was here, sooner or later she would be exposed, and there seemed to be many unreasonable things in this Marvel universe, because he discovered that the chief of the New York City Police Department was actually George Stacy. You have to remember that Peter is still so young. Logically speaking, George Stacy should not be the commissioner of the New York City Police Department yet. This made Carl a little confused. Even during his investigation, he found that Gwen Stacy was actually 17 years old. Are you kidding me? She was from the same era as Peter. Weren't they classmates? In some universes, she even became Peter's girlfriend. And now he is actually 17 years old, but Peter is still a little boy. This has refreshed Carl's understanding. Carl is very puzzled. Could it be that Gwen in this universe is Spider-Man? That's not right. Even if she is Spider-Man, she is still a person from the same period as Peter. Carl thought about it for a long time and couldn't figure it out, and finally gave up. After all, this is the real world, not a movie. He can't follow the movie's ideas and timeline. After thinking about it, Carl stayed at home with Aunt May, and Raven moved into their house with her luggage in the afternoon. Became Carl's butler. In the days that followed, Carl and Aunt May lived a life without shame and impatience. He hardly needed to worry about anything else. Green, who had changed Raven, took care of it. But Carl didn't find anything wrong with her these days, and even her purpose was unclear. Nothing was found, and there wasn't even a monitor, which made Carl very confused, and Raven was very dedicated to the internal affairs of the manor. This is because Aunt May has a good impression of her, and she has very strict requirements for the servants, chefs, etc. in the manor, which saves Carl a lot of worry. Since she has done nothing, Carl naturally keeps her indifferently. At home, I spend my days working with Aunt May, teasing Wanda, and playing games with Peter and Pilot. He was very free, but the situation on Tony's side was not very good. He found that his palladium poisoning was getting deeper and deeper, and after leaving the company to Pepper's management, he began to look for something to replace the palladium element, and even for this called Carl. What's wrong, Tony? Why do you have time to call me today? Carl hugged Aunt May and said to Tony on the phone. Hey man, listen, I'm almost finished now, what else can you do to say it quickly? Tony said to Carl on the phone in a lonely tone. His current level of palladium poisoning has reached 47%, and he tried all known elements, and none of them could replace it. Okay, Tony, you can go in peace. I will help you take good care of Pepper. How much palladium poisoning is there now? Carl teased Tony on the phone while holding Aunt May in his arms, and then asked one sentence. 47%. Oh shit, how do you know? I obviously didn't tell you, but you already knew it. Also, you bastard, can you stop using such a vulgar tone? Tony felt something was wrong after answering Carl casually. After all, he didn't tell Carl at all, and now Carl actually knew it, but when he heard Carl say in that obscene tone that he would help him take good care of Pepper, he became very angry. The reason why Carl dared to tease Tony so wantonly and said in that tone that he would take good care of Pepper, and when Aunt May was still in her arms, was because Aunt May had talked to him before and asked him to look for a few. After all, America is not monogamous. Although it is clearly stipulated by law, many people do not get married. They will only live with another partner. After conflicts or dissatisfaction, they will separate and look for the next one. The reason why Aunt May said this was that on the one hand she felt that she was not worthy of Carl, and on the other hand, Carl was too strong and she couldn't bear it alone. Carl had to toss every day. It might be very satisfying at first, but later. The pain in her back was so intense that she almost fainted, so she planned to ask Carl to find someone to share the burden for her. You must know that Carl's physical fitness is different from ordinary people, not to mention that the Black Shadow mask has been strengthening his body, so he has been getting stronger, but the progress is very slow. It is normal for Aunt May to be unable to bear it, and May his aunt even deliberately asked him to take Glyn in. Carl himself felt incredible, but he was a little moved. After all, it was Mystique that could transform into anyone. But Carl did not agree immediately, but dealt with it casually. Okay, Tony, you won't die. I have a way, but not now. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'll hang up. Carl said with a smile to Tony on the phone. After all, he knew the model of the future city. There's a new element hidden inside. Oh shit, you're so damned. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I donated all my artwork to the Children's Society. FK. After Tony heard what Carl said, he immediately realized why he didn't ask Carl earlier. Carl said that he would not die, so Carl was sure to cure him. He knew that he was about to die, so he donated all his works of art. You tell him now that he can't die. Carl has a way, but now is not the time. It is simply more uncomfortable than killing him. Ahem, hang up. After Carl said, he hung up the phone and threw the phone aside. Then he hugged Aunt May in his arms and kissed her passionately. Then he was executed on the spot despite Aunt May's resistance. Chapter 50 Raven's Experience. Advertise here. Chapter 50. Raven's Experience. After Aunt May endured Carl's torture that afternoon, she became even more enthusiastic about asking Carl to take Glyn in. Instead of persuading Carl, she did psychological work on Glyn, and kept saying what was good about Carl and so on. In this way, he was praised to the heavens. Carl was helpless when he saw this, but there was nothing he could do. Because now Aunt May won't let him go to bed at all, just because she is afraid that Carl will do something and then he can't help it. At the same time, he is also determined to find a sister to share the burden for her. With Aunt May's persuasion and guidance, Green actually agreed to give it a try, which made Carl feel incredible. After thinking about her identity, he felt that she was about to reveal her feat, so Carl agreed. Afterwards, Aunt May asked Carl to take Green on a date in the garden of the manor. Carl walked to the pavilion and sat down, looking at Green, constantly guessing her purpose and guessing various possibilities. Okay, Mystique. Raven, no need to pretend anymore, tell us your purpose, otherwise today will be your death anniversary next year. Carl used psychokinesis to pinch Raven's neck and said coldly. After all, since he couldn't guess, it would be so direct. I'm not going to play with you anymore, I'm not going to act with you anymore, I'll just ask you. Ahem, boss, I don't understand what you are trying to say. Are you a mutant who actually has superpowers? Raven covered her neck and said to Carl with difficulty, pretending not to know anything. Are you sure you're still pretending? If you don't say it now, you won't have to say it again later. An ice sword instantly appeared on Raven's forehead, and it was only 1 centimeter away from her skin. As long as she told lies again, the ice sword would be gone. It stabbed into her head without hesitation. Ahem, how did you know that I am Raven? I have no purpose here. I just want to find a place to live. Raven returned to her blue-skinned appearance and said to Carl with difficulty, but there was a hint of disbelief in his tone. Oh, are you sure you're not here for Eric? Or are you here to avenge Charles? Carl used psychokinesis to release Raven, and leaned on the table in the pavilion indifferently and said to Raven. What Eric, Charles? Although we have known each other for a long time, we have parted ways long ago. I have no contact with them for a long time, how could I? Also, what do you mean by revenge for Charles? Raven fell to the ground and said doubtfully to Carl. What, you have lost contact with them for a long time? Do you have a son named Kurt Wagner? Carl was a little confused after hearing Raven's words. After all, according to his memory, Raven should have been following Magneto, and even with him. The Red Devil has a son. What son? How could I have a son? I'm still a virgin, Raven said angrily to Carl. After all, this was his first time, where did he get a son from? It's simply the most ridiculous thing in the world. No, did I remember it wrong? Then why did you come to apply for a housekeeper job with me? Carl looked at the angry Raven in front of him and began to wonder if he had remembered it wrong. Then he asked Raven doubtfully. I told you, I'm just looking for a place to live, and I didn't do anything. If May hadn't kept telling me, what did you think I was here for? Raven turned back to Green and turned to Carl. He said after rolling his eyes. Ahem, okay, sorry. I'm sorry, maybe I remembered it wrong, sorry. After Carl confirmed that Raven was telling the truth, he immediately apologized to her. After all, if Raven is still the third, doesn't it mean that he has a chance? It can even be said that having Raven means he will have thousands of wives. HMPH. Can't we mutants live together? Although I don't know where you learned this, Eric and Charles and I have long since lost contact, and I have been changing jobs and living in different places over the years. Raven, she explained it to Carl for some reason, maybe because she thought Carl was the same kind, or because Carl didn't have a look of disgust in his eyes when he saw her original appearance, or maybe she had a good impression of Carl. After all, Carl is very handsome, and with his burly figure and mysterious temperament, he is simply a killer of women. Even though Raven is almost 60 years old now, she can't help but be a little attracted to Carl. She has met many young people in these years Junkai, but no one can look at him with tenderness or without disgust after seeing his true face, and Carl is the first. Although Charles didn't show disgust at the beginning, she didn't feel good about him, but was more grateful, because she met Charles when she went to his house to steal food, and Charlton continued to help her later. But due to subsequent conflicts, there was no further contact. Ahem, okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. I don't dislike your identity as a mutant. In fact, I am not a mutant, because my ability is acquired, not from mutant genes. And what you asked me before about avenging Charles was because I demolished his mutant academy, so I thought you were here to avenge him. Carl said to Raven a little embarrassed, and explained his ability for a moment. Oh, that's it. Alas, Charles still insists, but I don't know when the end will come. I don't have the lofty ambitions of the two of them. I just want to spend the rest of my life peacefully. By the way, boss, don't you want to fire me? Raven nodded in realization and then said to Carl a little lonely. No, how is it possible? And didn't May say let's try it? I think it's okay, what do you think? Carl said, shaking his head at Raven, and directly proposed that the two of them get along with each other and give it a try. After all, I have never chased a girl, so I just said what I thought. Good. Raven looked up just in time to see Carl's sincere eyes. She thought that Carl had not shown disgust in his eyes before, and she also had a little liking for him. In addition, it was all a misunderstanding before, and his identity has been revealed, and there seems to be nothing he can't try. Carl showed a smile after hearing Raven's answer, and then took Raven to stay in the garden for a whole afternoon, and did not go back until the evening. Because Carl had seen and heard in his previous life, he chatted with Raven very well, and Raven I have been to many countries and cities over the years. The two of them had no shortage of topics to talk about. They chatted all afternoon and still had something to say. Afterwards, they returned to the mansion and returned to their roles as master and butler. They have not yet confirmed their relationship, so it is better to resume their original identities and get along.